it is very much related to everyday reality. Most ideas come from everyday reality. And it is very useful for students and for teachers to know and to learn how to research, because it is very useful skill to have to learn more and to be able to answer the questions that we have. So I was talking about where do ideas come from, and we're talking about experience and opportunity, and I was talking about the typo that I had on my slide, and how I had the opportunity to conduct a COVID educational actors research by wondering what did students and parents and teachers and administrators were going through. I was able to read their comments on social media, and I was able to see, comments on radio, but I wanted something more systematic. So we conducted a study in the first few weeks of the pandemic, and we've been presenting that study in different congresses and conferences, and some of the presentations are also on YouTube if you want to look at, and we are going to continue the study with a follow-up to that, to see how the year ended. And so Jessica there, she's helping me with that study, and we're very interested in learning more about, how people experience the whole year and how do they think the year ended in terms of teaching and learning during pandemic times. Previous research is also an important way in which we get ideas. If you read sometimes research articles or books or something, it tells you, well, we know these things, but we still need to know more about these other things. So researchers are very good at suggesting other researchers what other things can be studied about their topic. So this is why reading is so important. Theories and replication are important sources of ideas. Replication means to take a study that was conducted and repeating it exactly as it was and with all the methods to validate the results of that study. Replication can happen with the different sets of participants. It can happen, for example, a study that was conducted in Japan or China, and we can see if it replicates here in Paraguay or how it replicates here. And knowledge gaps is, again, something that is related to previous research. So, so researchers, tell you, okay, all of this, we know all this, but we still don't know these other things. So this is why identifying those knowledge gaps is important, especially at the researcher level, when you're already establishing yourself as a researcher. And then also practical needs and problems. So as a teacher, you might want to know, how can you help your students better? How can you teach them better pronunciation? Or how can you teach them to enjoy reading? Or what are some strategies for writing? So you can do research studies, you can do action research to see how these practical needs are addressed. So I had a student, for example, who did a study on the use of music to teach fluency to his students. So some sources of knowledge include education, publications, that's what we're more aware of, organizations, experts, the researchers that write their results and they become authorities in what we know, information systems, events, congresses, research congresses, and also reasoning. So we're going to go to this more specific aspects now, because due to all the technical issues, this is the time when I was about to be done. So I'm going to try to run you through the really quick YouTube version of this presentation. So how do you develop a research topic? So first, from your idea that you generated from a problem or from reading or from talking to someone, from a professor who gave you an idea, a teacher, or the book that you use for your class, then you think about the possible ways in which that can be studied. You can think of the interest or other reasons, and you need to write those down. Something really important, if you remember, the definition of research is a systematic and organized way of finding answers to questions. So it's very important to keep organized and to write things down, because things that you write down, then you can come back and you can see it again. If you just keep things in your head, it's very hard to then reconstruct what you were thinking. So it's important that even when you're about to fall asleep and you got ideas, you keep some, even nowadays with a phone is very easy. You can keep voice notes or something on your cell phone to remind yourself of the ideas that you have. And then you need to research sources about the topics that you're interested in. So this is it's called an initial review of literature. And what is the literature? The literature is all of the things, all of the publications that have been published. I know it's being redundant. Also, all of the articles and books that have been published about this topic. So you should go and do some search and then read about. And this is one of the most important steps in refining and coming up with your research topic and your research question, because it's very difficult to narrow and to focus your idea from the top of your head, especially if you are a novel or a novice researcher. So you need to lean on more experienced researchers. And how do you do that? By reading research reports. So you may choose one of these ideas and you continue searching and reading about it. So I'm going to show you some tools that you can use to research on the internet, which is a great tool that nowadays we have available. If you believe it, 30 years ago when I started university, we did not have the internet. It was very, very different. It was way more difficult. We had to go to the library. We had to endlessly search books and page after page after page, and to search for the things that we needed. Nowadays, we can search on Google. We can search inside the articles, inside the documents. So the tools that we have nowadays have made research so much more powerful and easy. So this new knowledge that you gain through reading helps you identify issues and sub-themes or categories. And so you need to think and write down what these questions that can be asked about these topics. And so then you can narrow and focus on a question that is researchable. What does researchable mean? Researchable means that you can answer it with available data. So that means that you are in a position to find data about the question. So after that, you can write a purpose statement for your study. And what is a purpose statement? A purpose statement is a statement that tells the reader how you will answer the question. What is your study going to do to answer the question that you have? So for example, if I ask, what are the experiences of teachers and students during virtual learning during pandemic times? So my purpose would be something along the lines of to analyze students and teachers' views and perspectives regarding the measures adopted due to COVID-19. So that would be the purpose. The purpose would tell the readers how is it that you will be answering your research question. And so I'm going to go very briefly into the first tool that we have for research, and this is all I'm going to cover today, which is internet research. How do you find reliable sources, how you select them, and I'm going to share some tools that you can use to help you in this process. So when you are going on the internet, you need to consider the keywords that you need to search for. So for example, you want to search for COVID and students, or you want to search for teaching listening skills, or you want to search for improving pronunciation. So you need to look for the keywords that apply. And then you need to think about what kinds of information do you need. And so you need reliable academic sources. So I'm going to share with you some places where you can find that information. And you need to look at multiple angles, and it's important that you keep notes. This is that, like, the last one is the most important thing. This is what I told you in the previous slide, and now I'm saying it again because it's so important. Now, for effective online research, you need to know what are your available search tools. You know, everybody knows Google these days, and but there are other tools. Google Scholar, which in Spanish is called Académico. The Google Scholar is a derivation of the Google search engine that came out in about 15 years ago. So it first came out Google, and a little bit less than 10 years later, they came up with Scholar, Google Scholar. And what Scholar does is it searches all of the academic databases. So if it's on Scholar, you can be sure that it's a reliable and academic source, unlike your regular Google search. So my go-to place to start a research study is Scholar. So, and you need to understand how this works. And luckily, we have YouTube, and we have all kinds of tutorials that you can go and see how to search on Google Scholar. And every day, it's easier because you don't really, these search engines, you don't really need to use the advanced features very much. So the only thing that you might need to do is to limit, the year of publications. And then most importantly of all is to evaluate the results found with these tools. So this is important. So that's why research skills is also, it's important to have research skills, because one of the most important aspects of is to be able to identify which sources are more reliable than others. So this is something that with practice you will learn. And this is why research is an acquired skill, and it's not something that happens magically. It's something that we need to learn, and we need to nurture it, and we need to do it a lot to become good and better at it. So using search terms, like I said, you can search, for example, bilingual education and translanguaging, for example, the topic that Ivan was going to share, translanguage in the bilingual classroom, translanguage in the EFL classroom. So you can play with these search terms. So the more words you add to your search, the more specific it becomes, and you can see the difference in the number of results that you get. The more results that you get, the more the broader your search is, and you need to narrow it to find more specific things. Now, if you make your search too narrow, for example, you put it in Paraguay and there's no studies done in Paraguay, then you need to broaden it. So if you make it too narrow, you need to take words away. One thing that I always ask students is, how many pages do you go in your search engine? And most people stop at the first page. They look at the first page and then they go and change their search. That's not a good idea. You need to always go a few pages down the line. I'm a little bit obsessive about that, and I usually go all the way to page 10 to make sure that I don't miss anything, because some articles and some publications do not have the proper metadata inside the publication, so it won't show at the top of the page. So you need to keep going until all you start getting is nonsense, and that's when you need to stop. This is something a little bit old school. Boolean operators is something that libraries, databases use, and nowadays they're a little bit out of date because Google doesn't use them, and most search engines in the new databases, you don't need to use them. These were keywords like words like "and" to put two words together, or is to search one or the other, and not was something to exclude words from your search. Google uses the plus and the minus signs, but it still this doesn't really apply to Google searches. Now, also, something that you can use to limit your search is using quotation marks. So when you use quotation marks, the search engine will look at the exact phrase that you're looking for. And this is also a good way to find, for example, a quote from a source that you don't know where it came from. So you can put it on the search engine, and the search engine will find it where it is. And it is also a good way to find plagiarism on someone's paper. So we'll talk about that later as well. So here are some useful tools and sites that I compiled for you. There's plenty more. You're welcome to go, and this is what Google is really good for, because you can just put best research tools online 2020, and it will give you a long list and several lists of tools. And these are the ones I consider the most useful for you at the moment. SQL is something that all Paraguayan university students and professors should have a SQL account. SQL is the academic database subscription from CONACYT, and it's free for all of us. CONACYT pays the subscription. They pay a lot of money for all of us Paraguayan academics to have this subscription. So you can go on this SQL page, which is this is an image of, and you go to Registro de Usuario, and then you write your name, your email address, and the institution where you study or you teach, and they will the system will send you a reply, and then in a couple of days you will get a username. And inside SQL you can get many of the articles and books that you are not able to get freely on the internet. So this is a paid subscription. So those articles that you find on Google Scholar that you can access directly from Scholar, you can go and search for them on SQL, and you will probably be able to find them. There is a place that I really like to also suggest to my students, and it's a list of academic databases on Wikipedia. So if you go on Wikipedia and search academic databases, they have a really nice, always up-to-date list of all of the available databases. And it tells you which ones are free and which ones are paid. So you can go there, and then you can start looking for the free ones. And here we go. Number 3 is, like I said, my favorite because of just the way it's set up. Google Scholar, it searches all of the academic publications. So my first to-go place is Google Scholar. You search on Scholar. If you can't get it through Scholar, then you start looking where you can find that source. You can look it on SQL. You can look it on other academic databases and see if you can find it. Google Books is also a good option. The thing about Google Books is that they have many books, that some of which are full text and some of which are previews. And these previews are sometimes books that you cannot get through your library subscription, and you can see some parts of the book, and sometimes that might be enough for your research, or sometimes that could help you find the book somewhere else. Questia is a paid subscription library targeted to students. So it's a very accessible subscription that you can, if you, we used to get this for our students, but then now with SQL, we stopped using it. But if you don't have some accesses and you want to expand your access, Questia it's quite affordable as well. So that's something that is not free, but it has a lot of things, especially for undergraduate students. Project Gutenberg is a very good library of classic books that are free and open of copyright. So you can go there and you can find lots and lots and lots of, especially old books. And since nowadays we don't really and with COVID, it's very hard to go to the paper library. So you may find lots of books on Project Gutenberg. Like I said, the directory of open access journals, this is one of the ones that is available in the academic databases list. And that one lists all of the journals that are free and open source. Science Direct is also a service that offers free access to journal articles. ResearchGate is a very good source for researcher published articles. So for example, I'm a researcher and I write an article and I send it out to journal, and the journal allows me to post my article on ResearchGate. So many times, most researchers have a user on ResearchGate. So something that maybe you find on Google Scholar and it's not freely available, and you find the researcher on ResearchGate, you can contact the researcher. And I've had students contact researchers and they've provided all of their articles. So researchers are always very open with their research, at least with the published research, because it's already published. So if you are not able to find it anywhere else, go to ResearchGate and then you can request it, or you can contact the researcher there. And then last but not least, I put in there, and you can search this online. You don't have to have the link. You can just put a research guide, and it's called researchguide.com. And this is a site that I just found doing research for this presentation. And it's very, very straightforward and very easy to use for anybody. So I recommend it. And so taking notes is very important. Like I said, you need to take complete notes. You need to take all of the information that you will need for your research paper. You know, if you need quotations, but you also need all of the information about the reference. So for example, way below there, you can see how you cite a reference. And so you need all of that information. And for that, there are some note-taking and referencing tools that are very useful. Mendeley is a commercial freemium service. So it's free for users, and it's an app that you download to your computer, and you also have an online app that connects to your computer app, and you can add it on to your Word document, and then it makes, and Mendeley and Zotero are very useful, especially if you will manage lots and lots of sources, because they also have all of the different citation styles in their database. So once they have the information for the sources, then it doesn't matter what style the journal or the professor asks for. You can just indicate it to the tool, and then it will convert it for you. There are some easy online citation generators like EasyBib, Citation Machine, and others. These are very handy, especially if you want to cite like websites and things like that, because what they do is they grasp the information from the sources and they provide a citation. Sometimes if it's incomplete, you have to complete it. Now, going to the mix between note-taking and referencing, going back to Mendeley also allows you to take notes on the PDFs. So you upload the PDF articles, and then you can take notes on them. Word and Google Docs now, they have a referencing tool. So you can insert your sources in there, and then they will make the references for yourself. And then for note-taking, I'm old school, so I just use a document, a Word or Google Docs document, and I just use one page per for each source. I do an enter a new page, and then I just keep all my sources that way. But you can use something like Evernote, where you can clip your sources from the internet or from your or from the PDFs. You can use Evernote, or you can use Keep from Google. So these are note-taking apps that you can use. Now, What is a review of the literature? A review of the literature is a paper that provides background for your research study. And basically, you need an introduction, a body, and a conclusion, and you need to go from broader topics to specific topics. And what does a review of the literature, what is it for? It helps you in narrowing and making your topic specific in your question, in finding your research question and exploring all of the different aspects that relate to your topic. So this is why you go from general, so for example, education in Paraguay, and then you go to specific aspects of education in Paraguay, and then you're going to talk about English education in Paraguay. And within English education, maybe you will talk about the teaching of writing, and the challenges that maybe teaching writing in Paraguay may present. Your review of the literature should be focused, concise, logical, developed. Integrative means that it integrates all of the knowledge that you have available, and current. So when you are presenting a paper, they ask you that your sources are as current as possible. That doesn't mean that you can't use all their sources that may be classics. So for example, Chomsky, our famous grammarian, he stopped writing about linguistics many decades ago, but his work is still emblematic. So we can cite Chomsky, but then we have to cite the new studies that came out of his studies. So that's why it's important to have as well, if you have classic sources, also have current sources. Now, something very important in research is to share it. Having others look at your research and help you. Research is a collaborative endeavor. So when you have others look at your writing, look at your ideas, look at your paper, it can help you become more clear. It can help you become more complete and other things. Now, this is the last part. How do you avoid pitfalls like being too vague or using too many generalizations? And this comes from not reading enough. So you need to read enough to not be vague. Same thing with limited range and insufficient information. Irrelevant material, that also comes with being able to evaluate what is relevant or not relevant to your topic. Omission of contrasting view and omission of recent work are, and then the last but not least, and most importantly, plagiarism. How do you avoid plagiarism? Plagiarism is using others' words inappropriately. So if you are using someone else's words directly, you need to use quotation marks, and you need to make sure that your reader knows exactly where that quote comes from. So that means that you need the publication, the author, and the page number where it came from. So the reader, if he or she is curious about what you're citing, then he or she can go and read about it in the original source. Then paraphrasing inappropriately, maybe too close to the original, or not using quotation marks when it's a direct quote, when it's a quote and not a paraphrase. So there's different ways in which you can incur in plagiarism inadvertently, and sometimes not so much. But luckily, we have all these tools these days, both students and teachers, that can help us catch plagiarism. So if you're a student who's writing, then you need to use these tools to make sure that your work is free of plagiarism, or that you can say, well, if you're using someone else's words, that it's appropriately cited, that you have a reference, that you have a quotation that indicates that that's someone's work. Because why is it important to recognize other people's work? Because let's say you write something very important and someone is curious about it, they want to read more about it, they need to be able to go and find it. And it also shows how much you know and how much you've researched about the topic. So it gives substance to your work. So if you look at the studies and the published articles, the more famous or the more recognized the researcher is, the more he or she cites and recognizes his or her colleagues. So it's important that you start learning how to do that. And so that is the end. And I'm sorry about all our technical difficulties. Now I'm open to any questions that you may have regarding this. And if you have any further questions, you can contact me at vcanesc@field.una.py.
Thank you, Professor Canese, for this presentation. Thank you so much. Let's see what some of the comments from Facebook or the comments that also come from other means say. Besides, they were able to hear you very well. So that's a very positive feedback. We are very happy for that. And they are very thankful for the tools that you have shared. Let's see. So overall, I know that you have shared many great tools for teachers and also for students who are doing or starting to do research. Some of the people from in our group also mentioned that they wanted to say that SICO offers courses for students and teachers who might want to join. I don't know if you want to tell the audience a little bit more about that.
Yes, SICO, like I said, is a service provided by CONACYT, our funding agency for research. And if you subscribe to their list or do like them on their page, you can learn more about the training that they provide on using library tools and on doing library research. It's a very useful tool, and it's something, like I said, that we did not have before. When I came back from my PhD a while back, I was, clamoring for something that like that, and then we had it, and it's the best thing that could happen to our researchers. And this is why FAE, which is the funding national agency, they renewed the SICO subscription, because so many researchers and so many students and professors are making use of it. So the more we use it, the more reason we give the policymakers and the people who make the decision to continue subscribing to the databases.
Right. So it's very important that all of us use it then as often as we can. And it's also with all the tools that you have shared, I'm sure that we can start contributing as well, because we know that Paraguay, sometimes there aren't too many researchers working on, especially on the field of education, and how important it is to keep growing on the research field as well.
Yes, so if anybody has any research, you're welcome to send your articles to our journal, Ñemituna. It's a multilingual journal of language, society, and education. We publish in 6 languages, English, Spanish, Guarani, Portuguese, French, and German. So any of those 6 languages are accepted, and UNA has many journals that are published out of UNA, and some of them are out of Facultad de Filosofía. They also have 2 journals that they publish in humanities and social sciences, and also ADFA senders a journal of distance education. So we have many options nowadays.
One of the questions that we have has to do with plagiarism consequences in academia. What can you tell us about it? Are there consequences in academia when students plagiarize?
Yes, well, there's consequences at all levels, students, and also when researchers. So nowadays, for example, if you submit a paper to a journal, they put your paper through a plagiarism checker. That means that even there's something called self-plagiarism, and that means that you're you're publishing the same thing more than once. That's not allowed. So if you want to say something that you've said yourself, you have to cite yourself from previous research, for example. And for students, yes, if you plagiarize, you fail. it's like cheating. It's considered cheating. So it's a good idea to learn how to avoid it, because the consequences are more serious to you than to anybody else, and especially because we what professors want to see is how you process the information, and how you elaborate it, and how well are you're able to put together to answer the question that you have. And if you find that something that you found on someone's article or book is very, very important, then there's no problem. You can just quote it and then make sure that we, the readers, know where it came from. And that is how you avoid plagiarism, learning how to reference properly. And for that, there's APA and there's MLA and there's other ways, formats, guides that they tell you how to do this.
Wonderful. And some of the comments or questions on Facebook have to do with the consequences of plagiarism and the importance of acknowledging other people's work when writing a research. So I think that you have already answered these questions very, very well, and why it is important to be very respectful of other people's work. And also I'm very sure that our audience take with them different tools that will help them become better writers and better researchers as well.
Yes, and last, I just want to say, when you recognize other people's work, you're giving more importance to your own work. You're showing that you have learned from all those people, and you're leaning on, that's what, Google Scholar says, leaning on giants' shoulders. So you are standing on previous research. So, and that's why the better the researchers are, the more citations you will see on their papers. So that's something to take with you. And well, thank you. I know we're a little bit late. We need to keep going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Canese, for this wonderful presentation and on such an important topic, which is research. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our next presenter. Okay, so thank you so much, Professor Canese. And now we are going to welcome Maida Fiorio. This presentation is hosted by Agostina Alvarez and Aurora Villalba. And Maida Fiorio is going to talk to all of us about teaching adult beginners. So get ready for this very interesting topic that is coming up next. So let's welcome Maida.
Hello, how are you? How is everyone? Aurora, are you starting?
Yes, I am ready. Professor Agos, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. So I think we can get started. I wanted to give you a quick rundown of how the session is going to proceed. So we're going to introduce ourselves, Agos and I, and we will introduce Professor Fiorio. She will give us a quick presentation on what is to teach adult beginners. And then we will ask and moderate questions written from us, and also we're going to pick up questions from Facebook. Okay, so I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Aurora Villalba. I am a first-year student. Agos?
Hi, I am Agostina Alvarez. I'm 19 and I am a first-year student too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so now I think we can go to the main part. I wanted to give a quick round of applause to Professor Fiorio. She's an alumna of ISL. She is currently teaching literature alongside Mr. Aquino. As a fun fact, and very interesting fact, actually, she also holds a degree in architecture. She has over 10 years of experience teaching. She has taught all age ranges. She has taught children, teenagers, but she prefers to teach adults. And today she will be telling us about her experience teaching adult beginners. So please, Professor Fiorio, take the floor.
Thank you. Oh my God, that was a huge presentation. Hi, everyone. When I was thinking about what to to talk about in this gathering, and I thought that I wanted to share with you my experience in which comfort zone I feel more welcome, and I think I have more to offer. So I just wanted to talk about that. So some of you may feel related. I might help some doubts that you have about teaching. I want to start with this. Let me see, 1 second. I will present my screen. Let me open this. Share, right? So, let me see. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about what it was for me teaching adults. Like Aurora said, I taught kids, I taught teenagers, but I think I taught adult beginners for like 8 years, 9 years, I can't even remember anymore. And if you have to ask me, I think that kind of level is the one that I enjoy the most. But as an icebreaker, I wanted to share this video with you. I don't know if you guys are teaching already, you might feel related. I hope we don't have problems with the transmission.
Professor, could you check that you are sharing the audio of the video, please?
Actually, I am, but I thought this might be a problem because transmitting through Facebook is sometimes an issue, but it doesn't matter. We just continue, don't worry, because it sounds a little bit too soft. Anyhow, the video was about, then I can share the link with everyone. But the video was just about when you entering an adult class, you will have like different kind of, not issues, but like challenges that you will have to deal with, right? They are a little bit different than kids because kids normally are more exposed to the language. Like teacher Valentina said before, we are in different times, like they are very exposed. Internet is just like on the reach of the hand. And even though everybody can reach the internet, adults may not have they don't have it in them to like check social media every day and stuff like that. So they are less exposed. I always think like, how is gonna be my mom starting an English class today, right? Because it's not gonna be the same, right? So when you go to an adult class and you have people that are actually not exposed to the language at all, and some that a little bit and others a little bit more. So you encounter different kind of challenges, like I said. Some people may have problems with pronunciation, other people may have problems with grammar and stuff like that. It also happens with kids and teenagers, but it is like you can feel the difference between adults. So I wanted to talk about the preconceptions I had before entering an EFL adult beginners class. This was in my head because I started teaching when I was 24. So obviously I was super excited and I started thinking, oh my God, how is gonna be tomorrow like? So these were the ideas that I had. Like I thought that adult learners would be very, very independent. Secondly, because you talk to other teachers, right, and they tell you, young learners are so willing in the classroom, and adults, normally people think that adults will feel more self-conscious, so they may not want to do a lot of activities, I guess. This is a common that I share with my colleagues, and normally they say that because adults feel that they are not in the appropriate age to learn. They will be more close, maybe. Motivation. I thought that because when you start planning, you say, okay, what am I going to do, right? When I used to teach teenagers especially, you do this and then you play like a little game and another little game and stuff like that. So when I was starting to plan how my adult class will be, I thought, okay, they won't want to play at all because maybe they think they are over it, they think they are too old for it. So that was another idea in my head. Enthusiasm. I think we all can relate that we think that kids are synonym for enthusiasm. So what happened after teaching just a couple of months? This is the reality that I discovered. They are not as independent as people might think. I remember, I think it was at the same time when I started teaching, I took a kids class and I took an adult class. And I remember coming like Saturday afternoon after my adult class, like my legs used to hurt because then I thought, oh my God, it's like been like 8 hours, one class in the morning, another class in the afternoon. And I didn't sat down at all for 8 hours because you need to gesture, you need to move yourself. So I felt like this teacher here, like they ask you everything. They ask you everything. I remember one example was like, they ask you everything about pronunciation. Pronunciation, I think it was one of the aspects that we both struggle with because they want to know everything and they demand from the teacher a lot of explanation. I remember one exact example, they asked me how the GH sounds. And I don't remember the word, but I remember that sometimes it sounds like an F. And they said, so it's night then instead of night? And I was like, no, not there. Like, why not, teacher? They ask you everything all the time. It's like, why we say you and it's university, but then we say umbrella and stuff like that. And they are beginners. And I thought that they were not prepared for all the super long explanations, but they want to know, like, I felt like their brains needed to know why this word here sounds one way and in another place it sounds another way. It was very funny to me. So this is an actual picture of an adult class that I have. You can even see the little girl because one of the moms couldn't leave the girl at home. And they came and they surprised me. I remember we have puzzle games and take into account that seriously some people that start learning English are a very not advanced age, let's say like 45, 50 or something. Seriously, they come with no English at all. And then you have young adults that are maybe 20 something. Obviously, they know a little bit more. They are a little bit more exposed. So you start thinking, how can you combine the two different aspects of adult learners, right? And the thing is that even though they are not very exposed to the language, they actually really try. And I remember that I thought that I was the one taking them down because you don't know how far they can go. So you put low expectations actually when you can put them very high. Because I remember this game in particular was we made a puzzle of a Red Hot Chili Pepper song, and they didn't even know how to say hello, my name is yet. But they start listening to the song and they start putting the puzzle together, and of course they won't be able to sing the entire song, but their ears were like getting used to English, and they actually did it, and they were like on the floor putting the puzzle together. So they were super willing, and I didn't feel actually that they felt anxious at the beginning. Yes, but then when they realized that they are in a safe environment and we have other adults with them that are going through the same thing, they feel all the anxious, they leave it at the door and they give everything that they have to actually learn. This, for example, I remember in one exam, I thought like they won't be able to do presentations, and this is an actual presentation from my class. And this was a student of mine. He was an electrical engineer. He was like 48 something, and I don't know why he started learning English. I think he needed to work or something, but he was very limited. So I was scared for him because I didn't know how would he manage to actually do the presentation. And it wasn't a very hard one, but I just want them to try experiencing like some words in English. And he told me, my daughter, I think he had a 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, I don't remember, daughter, and she helped him do this for the exam. So he really impressed me, and he practiced and everything. Even though he didn't even know a lot of words that he was saying, he tried. So I felt that they were super motivated. Like I had adult students that were doctors, engineers, architects as well, and they were like 45 and stuff. And when you ask them, why are you learning English? And they said, because they need it for their work, and they were scared to come to the class earlier, but then they realized that that wasn't very good. So they joined late and they actually learned. I had a lot of doctor students. I don't know why they need English, but I used to have. And this one time I had a group that it was, because I taught at a private institute, right? So it was the first level. And when we tried to do a different activity, and I said, okay, next class, even though you don't know much English, blah, blah, but we're gonna try to sing a song. And seriously, they gathered together, they brought a karaoke equipment to the class. And obviously, I don't know if don't you feel when you were 5, you used to sing like English songs and it made no sense? But now you listen to the same song and says, that was the song about me, right? Obviously, their pronunciation, it was difficult and stuff, but they actually did it, and all groups did it. And I had students from 20 to 50, and they start singing. So what I learned from my experience and in my classes is like, I feel adults are a little bit like kids, but young kids. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and it reminds me the same. They start getting to know the language. It is just like my 5-year-old. She sings now and she doesn't know what she's singing, but she's trying, right? So it was the same. So I felt like I was my worst enemy, expecting less from my students, but they actually surprised me, and that's why I kept teaching them for a lot of years, because a lot of people used to tell me that it was a very difficult course, that they struggle a lot because they are adults and they are not very familiar with the language, and it was super challenging. But after some months, when you see that at least they can ask for a glass of water, it is very fulfilling. So that was all that I wanted to share with you. I'm so sorry if the video didn't work. I will post the link.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Professor Fiorio. We have created a couple of questions with Agos, and we will also be taking audience's questions. So if you want to share or if you want to ask any pointers or any tips, please feel free to do so through the Facebook page, and we will be reading those. So let's start with the first question, and this is a question of mine. As a teacher who prefers to teach adults, what is the hardest lesson that you learn from your students?
Yeah. The hardest lesson I think that I learned from them is that sometimes they feel very frustrated. I had some students that, because the thing is that when you have your first class, for example, you start telling them, we want you to try to listen to English all the time, to try to think in English all the time. It might be a little bit hard at the beginning because you are just starting with it. And it was frustrating for me and for them. And I think that was the hardest part, that some of them could not go through the process. They quit before time. Because normally what it happens is when you are teaching English as a foreign language, the students come to the class expecting you to be a Google translator. And it doesn't work that way. So after some classes, when they don't want to wait to see that they will start understanding, they quit. And that's hard because, I don't know, you cannot force them to stay in the class, right? But you as a teacher also cannot become the Google translator to make them feel more comfortable.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Agos?
Yes, now I have a question for you, Professor. Is there anything that you wish you'd known in your first year as a teacher?
Don't drink so much water. I remember that I used to get for me, it was very demanding, right? And what happened to me was that because I started to liking teaching beginners, and I wasn't offered to leave that class. Like, you have to stay there because you're liking it and you're starting to be good at it. And I remember that I normally drink a lot of water and I have no time to go to the bathroom. But nothing serious. Like, I like my process. Like, I like that I learn what I learn when I learn it. And I think all teachers that are starting to teach, you have to go through that process. And there is no formula, because you, Agostina, when you start teaching, or all the kids that are listening, you will have to form yourself, right? The groups are gonna be different, and there is nothing that I would have done differently. I like my process, and even though for me, for example, teaching kids was very difficult, I don't regret doing it, because you have to experience it to know if it is for you. Because I think teaching is a calling, and you need to find your place in the very broad scenario.
Okay, so my second question would be, what was the most challenging scenario you dealt with as a teacher, and how you overcame it?
I don't know if teachers that are teaching now will agree with me, but I think the hardest for me was teaching teenagers, because I felt like, besides a teacher, you needed to be a mother, a babysitter, and stuff like that. I'm not saying that that is something wrong, but there is a lot that comes with it. And I remember teaching teenagers, I have a couple of cases of parents that came to me and like, why is the administration calling me and telling me that my daughter's son is not coming to the class, and I leave her at the door every single Saturday? And you're like, what? Like, and I remember in the place that I used to teach, it didn't happen to me, but it was very serious. Some girl, like, her mom used to leave her there, and the guards saw her living with some adult guy in the car and stuff like that, and it was a disaster. So I'm not saying that teaching teenagers is something bad, but you really need to do the part and have it in you to actually be the best for them, because it requires a little bit more, I think.
Agos?
My second question is, regarding the number of students, do you prefer a large classroom or a small one?
I think I will prefer middle to large. The thing is that from my experience, like small classrooms, even one or two, I didn't enjoy it. I think that this is my opinion, obviously. Like when you are learning a new language, you need your peers, and you feel more related to somebody else that is going through the same process. So I actually enjoy my big groups. They are more fun. You have many kind of different personalities. For example, if in a group you have one or two people that actually are very lazy and don't want to do the activities, if they are in bigger groups, they feel left out, so they start doing the activities. So I enjoy middle to big groups. I start teaching one-on-one and then I stop. That wasn't for me. Oh my God.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, girls.
Amazing. So I want to bring up a question from Tony Vega on Facebook. He says, I would like to know, how does someone start their career in teaching, someone who is finding their career in teaching, find their most appropriate demographic, whether it's age or what aspects draw people to different age demographics, I'm guessing.
The thing is that I think we are different kind of people. Like, for example, you, Aurora, I don't know if you already knew that you wanted to teach kids. Like, I know some other teachers that from the beginning they knew, I want to teach kids. They are fun. I have a 5-year-old and I see her teachers and I think, oh my God, we need to give them a house, because I don't know how they do it. Like the reward should be a house, because they are super patient and they like, and if you are in the way of not knowing that, maybe you don't know what you want, but you might know what you don't want. If you already know that you are not a very, I don't know, patient person, don't start teaching kids, right? But if you are doubting about the other ones, maybe you can try it, because it might surprise you. Like I told you the other day, I'm here after 10 years of teaching, and I never planned to become a teacher. I think teaching called me. Like I also work as an architect, that's my main job. But since I'm 24, I have always taught in one way or another. So it called me, and I discovered that I enjoy more adults, and it was fun also teenagers. But I think if you're doubting, you need to try it.
Thank you so much. Agos?
Yes, I have a question from Facebook also from Lili Larramendia, and she is asking, is it good to teach adults first to gain experience and then teach younger people?
The thing is that from my experience, I don't want to call it easier, but like I said before, I felt like teenagers were more exposed. They listened to, I don't know, High School Musical, that was in my time. And they watch a lot of TV, and they listen to a lot of English music, and they, even though if they are not fluent speaking, they are exposed to the language, and they use a lot of social media, the internet, and stuff like that. So if you want to get your experience through adults, I don't know, because for me it was more challenging. How can you teach a person that is 50 and seriously doesn't even know what is hello? Or he knows what is hello, but he doesn't know how it looks like, because he have never read it and seen it and stuff like that. So I think if you want to get comfortable teaching, maybe don't start teaching people that are not exposed at all to the language. That is my advice.
Thank you so much. Is it my turn, Aus? Okay, sorry. I just wanted to check. Okay, so Maggie Espinola from Facebook is asking, is it normal to have anxiety when you start to teach? If so, when does that feeling disappear, and what can we do to feel more comfortable with the people paying attention to us?
Oh my God, if you don't feel anxiety, I think the first time that I was gonna go to my class the next day, I couldn't even sleep because you might not think that first impressions are the only ones, but you wanna cause a good first impression, right? That is a very difficult question because, like I said, groups are very different. How will you overcome it? I remember the day before start teaching, I watched a movie that I really like and that relaxed me. But we are different. Some people like exercising and other people stuff like that, right? But what you need to do, in my opinion, is go through it because you're not going to be able to put it aside until you start actually teaching, right? But I think adult classes for me was they immediately respect you, right? We have some issues with age situation because when you have like very advanced age students and you are a very young teacher, they ask you, but are you actually a teacher or you are training to become a teacher? And you're like, So, but after some time and you show that you are actually qualified and they don't mind anymore, right? And teenagers were kind of different, but it's not that they don't respect you, they just don't want to respect authority. Maybe you can practice with your little brother first, but because there is not a formula, it has to do with your character and it has to do with the kind of group that you have. Like one thing that happened to me is like one time I had a teenage class that they were so disrespectful, I left. Like I'm not gonna start screaming to anybody and put myself in that position, right, of me being disrespectful. So I left. Like for me it was I don't have to take this. Why? And then everything worked out, but
in that regard, is it when you mentioned that situation, you leave, and do you ask for supervisors' help? What do you do in those situations when dealing with disrupted students?
the thing is that I also taught in a school for a bit, and the way the private institute and the school handles is different, right? Because normally in a school you are supposed to be with the kids the whole year, right? In the private institute it doesn't work like that. We are constantly moving, and from one class to the other you change, right? In that case in particular, no, I didn't ask for supervision because I went to the supervisor and said, if they continue like this, I'm not teaching them, you need to find them another teacher, right? And obviously the supervisor comes and I don't know what she said to them, right? Something like, if you don't behave, you're gonna be let out of teacher, because that was a difficult class. They were actually with no teacher because nobody wanted to teach them. So, but of course you need to talk to somebody else because it's not the case either that you pick up your bag and you go home. Bye. No, right? You have to let somebody know.
Should I go now? Okay, so I have a question from Facebook from Silvia Terol. She wants to know, how did you go from architecture to teaching? And when did you realize that you had a call for teaching?
I don't know if I can give you the truth. No, actually, I started studying architecture after high school, right? And then, but I had a passion for the English language. It's not like I like teaching anything, right? I really, really enjoy English. Like teacher Valentina said before, it's like it's a very different time. We didn't used to have internet. We didn't. I remember when I wanted to know what the song said, you needed to play the cassette and then rewind it to hear it again, right? So the thing is that I really like movies and I was very into music and everything was in English. So I thought that I could understand better movies and stuff if I knew English, right? So first it was, okay, let's learn more, right? I will go and study in an institute. So I went. I already understood because I was very embedded into English, so listening all the time, and I feel like I know English better than Spanish. I don't know if it happens to all of you, right? Um, and then I started learning and learning and learning, and then the classes were over. Like I have no courses to take anymore. And so where I was a student, they told me, why don't you start teaching? Like I told Aurora the other day, and I said, okay, that's fine because architecture is expensive, and I needed to. I said I can use the extra money in the extra pocket. And so something that started as a hobby, I finished architecture and I went to ISL. And I realized that it is super comforting, and I said I want to do this too. And a lot of people ask me, how can you combine the two things? I cannot. Like now I'm also teaching architecture, but it's not like I know technical architectural English. It didn't work that way. It's not like I will go and live abroad and use my English in architecture. It wasn't like that for me. It's like for me it was two different passions. And I realized that English was really a passion. And it is an advantage for me? Yes, it is, because I already work with the United States Embassy here, because I'm an architect and I know English. And my husband also is an architect and he knows English. And he also works with the embassy. So it brought us advantages? Yes. But they didn't start it together.
Awesome. So to start wrapping the session up, I think we can combine two questions. So the first part of the question would be how to comfort students that are too afraid to start studying. And then the second part would be how you compel students to keep going. Because once motivation wanes a little bit, it is important to keep them motivated.
Yeah. What you say is super important. I always thought like, number one, I think even if the student doesn't know any English, he needs to feel motivated. That's for sure, right? Because I also experienced that when people go to study something because they are forced to, seriously, you can, I don't know, bring them Chomsky in front of them to talk about I don't know what, and they're not gonna learn it because they need to want to learn, right? And how you keep them motivated. It did happen to me. Like I said, like I have some students like after the third class, they said, I'm not gonna learn. This is too difficult, or they start thinking, how are we going to learn if we don't understand, right? And I always did this and start explaining the process, and that it actually is, if you're gonna learn a new language, and I think it won't happen to me again if I want to go and learn French. It is like my daughter, she's 5 now, and now she knows how to speak, right? But before, they don't know, and they start first listening to it, and then they start speaking, and they make a lot of mistakes, and you cannot understand them. So I always ask my students, if it took you like My daughter doesn't speak super properly yet, and she's 5, right? If it took you like 4 years, 5 years to learn Spanish, why are you rushing it to learn English? I think the problem is that it's not that students are not motivated, but I think it's the timing. They expect to know English perfectly in 2 months. That's impossible, or kids will be speaking in 2 months, stuff like that. So when they actually get that, but I think also what happens is the propaganda. Some of them tell them, come here and you will speak in like 3 days and stuff like that. So when they realize it doesn't work like that, they actually feel motivated. Okay, so I'm good now, so it will take more and stuff like that. Like I started studying English when I was 15, and I still feel like you learn every day. We don't know everything. That's what I think.
Thank you so much, Professor Aus.
Thank you, girls.
for everything. I think it is time to wrap up this little chat that we had. Very interesting questions. Thank you to the audience for sending all your wonderful questions. And of course, thank you, Aurora, for co hosting this with me. And thank you, Professor Maida, for giving us your insight. It was very, very, very enlightening.
Thank you, girls. I hope I help a little bit sharing my experience, and you are great. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Professor Fiorio. Thank you. A big thank you to our students, Agustina Alvarez and Aurora Villalba, for putting this together. What a great job, ladies. Congratulations. And now we're going to get ready for our next presentation. This next presentation is going to be hosted by Soledad Gomez and Taide Apleyard, and it's going to be presented by Professor Ivan Ramirez. His topic is Let's Translanguage, using students' full linguistic repertoires in the EFL classroom. So let's welcome Professor Ramirez and students Soledad Gomez and Taide Apleyar. Hello, everybody.
Hello, thank you for the welcome. First, Soledad is not going to be able to join us today. She had some issues with the latest storm.
With electricity, with Ande,
yes,
like all of us.
we are like all of us, exactly. And first, I am going to introduce Professor Ivan. He got his bachelor degree in English language at the UNA, and his master degree in TESOL, which is teaching English to speakers of other languages, at the University of Melbourne, Australia. He also investigated the use of technology in higher education, and his thesis work was about the pedagogy of translanguaging. He's currently teaching at a bilingual school in Asunción and volunteers at Paratesol. So this is actually a very interesting topic, so we will be waiting for your questions after the presentation. Professor Ivan.
Thank you, Thais, so much. And thank you, Elena, as well, for that introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. I am so happy to be here and to talk about a topic that I am passionate about. And I think that this is the right place to talk about these issues that concern the teaching and learning of English as a second and foreign language, and especially in teacher training programs like this. So, and before I start with the presentation, I want to do a little activity with the audience, okay? The ones who are watching us through Facebook, and also the ones who are here on the Meet session, okay? So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to make this interaction. It's for you to have an idea of what this presentation is going to be about. So if, which I'm sure you do, if you have a cell phone with you, or you can also use your computer, and I'm going to ask you to go to a website. Let me show you just 1 second. It's called PERDEC. Probably you have used this already if you're a teacher. And it's a really beautiful tool. So let me just get this ready, and I will explain how we're gonna make this interaction. All right, I'm getting there. So it's loading. And I think it's gonna take there's like a 10 seconds time between Facebook and Google Meet, but it's fine. So I want you please to go to this website, joinpd.com. All right, and it will ask you for a code, okay? And I want you guys to use this code, GOSZFB. Okay, just log in with yourself. If you have another device, a different device from the one that you're using to watch this presentation, that's better. So we've got here one student. Someone wrote something. There you go. Perfect. So if someone can share that on the, okay, let me put that on the. It's joinpd.com. I'm gonna put that on the on Facebook. There you go, and it will ask you for a code. You don't need to register or anything. Just join with that link and put this code here. So let's wait 2 more minutes, and then we're going to start. The more people we have here, the better, because I want to get your perceptions on some issues that we're going to be discussing here. So go to this link. Joinpd.com. I already put the link on the chat box there on the the Facebook live session. Go to that link and put this code right here. Yeah, there's Elena said you will get a direct link to this project. That's true. So 14, okay, that's great. We have 14 students. So let's wait 1 more minute, and then we're going to start this presentation. Okay, it has begun already. It's fine. Okay, so the topic for today's session is let's translanguage using students' full linguistic repertoires in the TESOL classroom. So don't worry if you see some terms that might be confusing. I will be unpacking each of these terms, especially what do I mean by translanguage? What is translanguaging? And also students' linguistic repertoires. What do I mean by linguistic repertoires? I will be unpacking each of these terms during the presentation. All right, so this is the first question. You will read some statements, and you will need to tell me if you agree or disagree with them. So do you agree or disagree with the following statements? The first one is, allowing the use of students' mother tongues in the EFL or ESL classroom could be beneficial to the learning of the additional language. So on your devices, you should have the option of agree, disagree, or not sure. And so just click the ones that, I mean, if you agree with this statement or not. And I'll show you the results in a moment. So we've got already 6 responses. That's great. Let's wait a little bit more. So basically is it okay if I use the L1 of my students in the classroom? Is it okay if I let my students use Spanish in the classroom? Is it beneficial to the learning of English in this case? So that's the key word. Is it beneficial? All right, so let's show the responses. So excited. Okay, most of you agree. 12 people here agree with the statement, 7 people disagree, and 6 people are not sure. Great. These are great responses. All right, let's continue with the next one. And pay attention to this statement. Native-like proficiency should be the goal of EFL, ESL programs. Now, what do I mean by native-like proficiency? It's basically speaking or sounding like someone who was born and who has spoken English since childhood. So native-like proficiency should be the goal of the EFL, ESL programs. So do you agree or disagree with this statement, or you're not sure? I'm going to give you some minutes to answer this. So we've got 14 responses. So this has been a really debated topic in the TESOL field. Like, should we really teach our students to sound like native speakers? Is that actually the goal of teaching and learning English now in the 21st century? All right, 24 responses. Let's see. All right, 6 students agree. We've got here 16 people who disagree with this, and 2 people are not sure. Very great responses. Actually, your responses are kind of in sound with the topic that we're going to be discussing today. The final one, and I need you to read these positions very carefully. So, with which of the following positions or views do you agree the most? So, this is kind of what is your stance, or we could even say what's your language ideology here. So, and these 3 views were actually taken from 3 different teachers. This is from a study that was done on translanguaging, and these are actual positions from teachers. So, with which of these positions do you agree the most? Number 1 says, I don't allow my students to use their L1 in the classroom. I believe it's detrimental to the learning of the target language. As a teacher, I never use my students' L1 as well. The second one says, I believe students will use their L1 no matter what you tell them. It's really difficult to control it. But I always reinforce to my students the fact that if you want to speak English faster and better, you should only speak English in the classroom. And the third position says, a judicious use of the student's L1 is always positive. The L1 of the students could be used as a tool to leverage, meaning to maximize the learning of the additional language. I don't see it as something negative or as an interference. So 3 different, very different positions on the use of a student's L1 in the classroom. Which one do you agree the most? 1, 2, or 3? Or none of them? Because you could also say, I don't agree with any of these 3 teachers, which is possible. So what is your view? We've got 14 responses. Let's wait for a few more. Take your time to read, okay? So basically, the first view, it's kind of saying, yeah, we don't use the L1 of my students in the classroom. We don't use Spanish or, Portuguese, whatever the first language of the students are. And the teacher also, she doesn't or he doesn't use the students L1 in the classroom. The second teacher has a more, I wouldn't say passive or active position in the use of the L1. He's like, we can't help it. I mean, students will use their mother tongue no matter what you tell them, but I always reinforce them that, using English is the main goal. And the third teacher, this teacher has a really active position on the use of the students L1, and he or she sees the use of the students' first language as something actually positive. Okay? So, 23 responses. Let's take a look at them. All right, most of you agree with the second view. Okay, 3 people agree with the first one, 10 with the second one, and 3, I'm sorry, no. 3 students or 3 teachers agree with the first position, 10 people with the second one, and 8 with the third position. And 2 people are unsure. Okay, very good responses. So most of you agree with the second one. Great. All right, so here's where to stop this presentation. And don't worry, we're going to discuss each of these issues in depth here in the presentation. And to be honest, there isn't a right or wrong answer here, kind of, and you will see why. Let me just go to here. We go. Okay, perfect. So, Taida, can you see my screen? The one that says table of contents, or
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
perfect, perfect. So this is going to be like the map of this presentation. We're going to start by talking about something that had a huge impact on the field of second language acquisition and and TESOL in general, the multilingual turn. All right. Then we're going to talk about translanguaging, which is the main topic of this presentation. And then I will show you some pedagogical functions of translanguaging. And the final position is, where do we go from here? Okay, now that we know all this, what do we do? What's the goal of teaching and learning English now? Okay, so let's start with the first term, the multilingual term. And I'm not sure if some of you are already familiar with this term, but basically the multilingual term is, it's a term that it's like the new, I want to call it the new kid in the neighborhood of applied linguistic. It's basically a term used to critique the monolingual ideologies that were originated in nation state, like in the US, for example, that have dominated research in applied linguistics. So I'll say this again. It's a term that's used to criticize the monolingual approaches. What do I mean by monolingual approaches? Like the English only approaches that has been used since the 1900s in the learning and teaching of English. Even though these multilingual ideologies have existed for a very long time already in different contexts, and it has gained more attention from researchers, especially researchers in the field of second language acquisition. And we're going to see that now more in depth. So here we have these terms: flexible bilingualism, metrolingualism, plurilingualism, all these different terms that basically, I mean, they're very similar, but um, each of them has again a difference in how they view the use of a student's first or students' linguistic repertoires in the classroom. But the one thing they have in common is, hey, we have been using this approach, this monolingual approach, since for so long, and in a way, neglecting the use of a student's first language or of a student's languages in the learning, not only of languages but also of content, is not working anymore. So let's start taking a look at how we can actually use our students' linguistic resources for them to acquire or learn the new language, the additional language, or new content, especially in the context of English as a second language. Okay, so multilingual term. Here's where researchers are starting to say, hey, wait a second. Let's change the direction in where we're dealing with the issue of this monolingual approach, and let's start to shift from not allowing the use of the students L1 in the classroom to, let's start questioning: is it actually useful? Is it beneficial? And they have found that actually it is, and that's why you have all of these different terms that were created, especially in the around the year 2010. All of these terms gained a lot of relevance. Okay, one of these terms, and especially the one that has gained a lot of recognition, is translanguaging. Okay, which is not the same as translingualism, the word as translingual practice that you're seeing there. They're kind of cousins, but they're not the same. So in response to this multilingual term, all of these researchers that are saying, hey, let's take a look at the students' first language or the mother tongues of the students. Let's stop ignoring them and let's use them as a tool. Now, the field of TESOL, um, they they haven't yet propelled itself away from the monolingual orientations, or from the monolingual approaches. They gave some room to some terms such as plurilingualism. There has been, I mean, there was already um, an issue on TESOL Quarterly, which is one of the most important journals in the field of TESOL. They talked about plurilingualism. They also gave some room to translingual pedagogy, but not yet to translanguaging. All right, and we're gonna see why also. But before we get there, I'm sorry. Before we get to translanguaging, I want you to like I want you to know why this multilingual term is so relevant and why it's so important. So this would be like the traditional view of, or the monolingual approach that has been widely used since the 1900s in the teaching and learning of English. It's very structuralist. It's an, as it says here, it's rule-based system. You have, for example, the L1 of a student. Uh, the the languages are seen as being separated, compartmentalized, and it's more additive. All right, it's like learning one language over the other. Now, this is what a more integrated approach, a more dynamic approach to the to the learning of language um, is basically. It's more emergent, it's more fluid, it's embodied, it's flexible, it's heterogeneous. Okay, so what the multilingual turn has done and is continuing to do is, let's move away from this perspective to this perspective, which is actually the way students learn the language. So here you can see, for example, a comparison of these two. So this is an attempt to show you the two different views of language learning. First, at the top, we have the traditional code with focuses on learning languages as autonomous structures that are compartmentalized. And then we have the one that is at the bottom. It's more dynamic, and it focuses more on the meaning making process of the students. All right, so now we're gonna get to talk about what is translanguaging. All right, which is a term that was actually coined in 1994 by St. Williams, who was an educator from Wales, who designed this approach to bilingual education in which two languages were used simultaneously during classroom activities. So, for example, one student would read the text in Welsh, and the other student would, and the same student would report that in English, for example. So the languages were being used simultaneously. It's very difficult to conceptualize translanguaging because it is a concept that is still evolving. For example, Ofelia Garcia, who is one of the main proponents of translanguaging, she expanded the concept of translanguaging by saying that it's not focused on languages, but rather on the deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire. And I will explain what is a linguistic repertoire. So it's not focused on the language itself, but on the practices, on the language practices of the students. Which means that bilingual students or multilingual students do not possess two or three compartmentalized and separate languages in their mind, but just one linguistic system from which they choose strategically the features to communicate, depending on the context where they are. Now, let me illustrate this for you better. Here we have again the concept that Ophelia gives to translanguaging. And okay, let's try to compare translanguaging to the traditional models of bilingualism. So first we have, for example, the very traditional view of bilingualism as being basically two monolingual speakers, like having two different monolingual speakers in your mind, like Spanish in one part and English in the other. So languages were seen as two separate things in the mind of the bilingual speakers. But then in the 1970s, Cummings comes and says, hey, no, they're not actually separated. I mean, there's actually what he calls a common underlying proficiency of languages, meaning that these languages, I mean, there is an interdependence across languages, which means that for multilingual speakers, the development of a skill or proficiency in one language assist the development of a similar abilities in the other. So here we're starting to see a shift, saying that, hey, wait a second, the L1 of a student is actually helping the acquisition of the L2. And this was in the 1970s when Cummings proposed this common underlying proficiency. Translanguaging was not a term yet that was there, and then we have other terms like heteroglossia that actually opened the way to translanguaging. But before translanguaging, we have a very common term that I'm sure you're familiar with, which is code switching, which is basically going from one language to another depending on the context where you are. And again, this is very similar from translanguaging, and I will explain why. So, as you can see here in this picture, when you code switch, it's like you go from, in my case, I go from Spanish to English, for example. Like, it's like I jump from one language to another. Like in one situation, I use Spanish, or I could even use both in like both languages in one sentence. But from the, if we follow the concept of code switching, it's like I go from one language to another. It's like I switch. For you to visualize this, imagine, for example, you have your phone and you have the dictionary. So you go from Spanish and then you change your dictionary to English, like for the predictive text. So that is code switching, like switching from one language to the other. Translanguaging is different. It views languages in a different way. How? Okay, imagine this is my head. Okay, this is more rounded, but imagine this is my head. And I have these two languages here. I have, okay, English and Spanish. These are the two languages that I speak. A little bit of Guarani as well, but let's just focus on Spanish and English. From the perspective of code switching, I go from English to Spanish like this. Like I cross one language to another. According to translanguaging, I don't do that. Why? Because they're mixed. They're together. They're not actually separated in my mind. Okay? It's just one linguistic system that I have. And that is what is called your linguistic repertoire. So for translanguaging, languages have no boundaries. They're just one in your linguistic system. And you choose the linguistic features, not the languages, the linguistic features of your linguistic repertoire to speak depending on the situation where you are. Like now, for example, I'm using the linguistic features of English to speak to you, but I could easily switch to Spanish. It's like I'm not switching off my Spanish and switching on my English. That's not what the Spanish is there in my head. Okay, so that's why translanguaging is different from code switching. It's not that I go from Spanish to English, because I have just one linguistic system. I just choose the linguistic features of English and Spanish, and that's another topic that it's not within the scope of this presentation. But translanguaging doesn't see languages as having how can I say this? According to translanguages, languages are socially invented. They're social inventions. Okay, so they actually have their translanguaging doesn't view languages as having boundaries. And I would love to explain that more because it's really a great topic, but I want to focus more on the pedagogy of translanguaging and not so much on the theory yet. But please go ahead and look for that. So according to translanguaging, languages are social inventions, okay? But I'm not gonna get in there yet. But if you have some questions about that, I'll be happy to answer those later. Okay, so now that we have the concept of translanguaging kind of clear, if it's not clear to you, don't worry. It's a difficult concept to grasp. I mean, and as I said, it's still evolving. It's not a fixed concept because translanguaging, it's a theory, it's a practice, it's a pedagogy, it's a process. Okay. All right. How do I put the theory into practice, and how does this change the teaching perspective on ESL? I mean TESOL, which could be English as a second language or English as a foreign language. Here I put EAL because the term English as a second language is not being used anymore. We're using more the term English as an additional language because in contexts such as Australia, Canada, the USA, students who are coming to these countries, they don't only speak one or two languages. They usually speak three, four, even five languages. So it's more appropriate to use the term EAL, English as an additional language. All right, great. So let's focus first on the EAL context. Okay, Australia or the US, because they kind of have this the same context. So we have all these students, immigrants who are coming from different backgrounds. They already speak different languages. They already have a rich linguistic repertoire. They come into these schools, these American schools or these Australian schools, and they are being forced, because that's a word, they're being forced into learning the language and the context with monolingual approaches, meaning that, hey, only use English in the classroom. You're not allowed to use Hindi, or you're not allowed to use Portuguese or Spanish. You're here to learn English. So their linguistic repertoire is being repressed. And of course, it's hard for them to learn the content and also the language, of course. So what translanguaging is proposing here is, hey, don't put a lock on their linguistic repertoire. Use these very rich resources, these very rich linguistic resources that your students already have, so that they could learn better the additional language, but also the content. And the teacher doesn't have to speak the languages of their students to do this. And we're not going to get into the pedagogical strategies of translanguaging, but there are pedagogical strategies in translanguaging for teachers who are monolinguals that they could use with students. So no matter how many languages you have in your classroom as an EAL teacher, you could still use translanguaging, and that will actually benefit your students because you're using the previous knowledge that they already have to acquire new content and to acquire English in this case. All right, let's move now into the EFL topic. And this is kind of more interesting because this is our context. And I know that you might be asking yourself, hey, but I've been using the English only policy in my classroom. I've learned English by using only English and, full immersion. Translanguaging is not against full immersion. Translanguaging is not in opposition to immersion. All right, and we're gonna see that here. Oops, sorry, it's not changing. There we go. All right, so before we get into how I can or how can I use translanguaging in English as a foreign language? Because in our context, we need our students to be exposed to the language. That is absolutely true. I mean, we're not in the US, so they leave the classroom and probably they're not going to use their English anymore. So we need to provide them with what Krashen said, comprehensible input. I mean, that's very important. However, and let me read this quote here. Different studies have shown the importance of the use of translanguage in the classroom for migrant and regional minority languages. For example, resulting in better achievement. This is in the case of EAL students. For protecting and promoting regional minority languages. So, and let's go back again to the EAL context. When we use the students' first languages, we validate their linguistic identity. So that's very important. and also for raising participant confidence and motivation. So here we are also taking into account the emotional aspect of teaching. We could also translate, or we could also move this into the EFL context. Um, it also says here that the use of translanguaging, or using students' linguistic resources uh, help academic achievement. So they have seen improvement in the content part, not only on the language. Um, Also, using multilingualism as a resource for learning has been beneficial in all these studies that you have here. I know that it's boring to look at all of these names and pages, but the reason why I put this is because I want to show you that there has been, and there are already, a number of studies that show the benefits of using students' linguistic resources in the classroom, meaning that not prohibiting students to use their home languages to learn a new language. And it says here, using multiple languages in the classroom has no negative effect on the achievement of the majorative language. Okay. Now, and here's where we finally go into immersion. I just got ahead a little bit. I'm sorry. So, what about immersion? What about EFL context? Now, let's try to define what is immersion again. So, it's traditionally is the didactic approach to teaching English as a foreign language, which is based on the separation of English language from the other languages of instruction. Okay, by using the one person, one language, meaning that it's only English in the classroom, okay, or German or Korean. Now, translanguaging is not against this method. It's not telling us, hey, don't use immersion. You know, okay, it's not really about that. And here we have this quote that says they're new, and I put new in parentheses because this was actually this. I mean, researchers have been saying this since the 1960s. Um, Language skills are transferable across languages, varieties, and register, meaning that the fear that we usually have about language interference, I don't want to say it's not true, but I just want to say that that is true from the perspective of a monolingual approach. From a multilingual perspective, you're actually using your students L1 or the other languages as a resource to learn the second language or to learn the content in the case of EAL students. Okay, so now we're shifting. We're not seeing the use of the students L1 as something negative, but actually as a tool. There's a baby, so it's just to exemplify the immersion thing. Okay, but again, how do we use translanguaging? Okay, it's not just I just let my students use Spanish and that's it. No, this has to be planned. Okay, and we have, or I have found 3 different functions of pedagogical translanguaging, and this was written by Duarte a few years ago. And as you can see, this is really new. I mean, we're still developing new pedagogies in translanguaging. So the first one is a symbolic function, okay? Which is basically, let's say that you don't speak your students' first language, but still you recognize your language, you valorize your language in the classroom, okay? Like you mentioned it, you don't forbid, it's that you don't punish them for using the L1 in the classroom. And I'm saying here L1 for us to understand what I'm trying to say. It could be mother tongue, it could be Spanish or Portuguese. And the second one, which I think it will be useful for our context, is this scaffolding function, which is basically you use translanguaging as a bridge for them to acquire the other language, in this case Spanish. So you use it as a tool, okay? You use already the linguistic resources that your student have, in this case Spanish or even Guarani, for them to acquire English. And the final one is the epistemological function, which is, this is probably the one that Ofelia Garcia is more in favor of, which is when you're actively using in your classroom both languages. not only for to learn the language English, but also to learn content. This is more in the context of the US or Australia or Canada. So basically, you are implementing in your lesson plans, you're actually planning the use of the students' home languages in the classroom by using different strategies like cognitive walls, mother tongue based discussion groups, even translation. Like the very infamous and criticized translation, it's widely used. And there are studies, recent studies, that have shown that it's actually positive to use translation in some instances, not always, of course, but it is okay. And it's not that you're just lazy because you don't want to explain your student the or you don't want to draw on the board what is the meaning. I mean, there are actually benefits to using translation as a strategy. And as I said, we're not going to get into the strategies, but I did my master thesis on translanguage pedagogies and strategy. So I might send you the link for you to take a look at the different translanguage strategies that are there now in the literature. All right, so these are the three functions that in word and the way in which you could use translanguage in your classroom. The idea here is using your students L1 as a tool, okay, and not neglecting the use of their mother tongue in the classroom anymore. It's not something negative. All right. However, bear in mind, translanguaging is not a one-size-fits-all approach, meaning that it's not that I'm just gonna let my students use Spanish like whatever they want. No, you have to make a judicious use of your students' mother tongues, okay? And it needs to be strategically and that was so difficult. Purposefully planned in instruction and assessment, okay? So and again, it's not that I just go and I use Spanish or I use Portuguese in the classroom. I mean, there are many things that I need to take into consideration. One of those things is what is the policy of the school where I am? Do they have an English only policy? If that's the case, okay, then I need to respect that policy. Am I in a language institution where parents expect their children to only learn English and the teacher only to speak English? Well, then you have to be careful if you want to implement these translanguaging pedagogies, okay? But I want you to be sure that there's a theory that backs you up, that it's okay if you want to use your students L1 in the classroom, okay? It's not something negative. It's not gonna interfere with the process of acquiring or learning in this case, English. And again, it says here, you have to use a judicious and optimal use of the learner's L1 in the classroom, okay? So you have to use a principled translanguaging, meaning that you need to know when and why your students' languages might be used in support of the learning. Okay, so, and again, as I said, it's not just using the L1 in the way you want. I mean, it has to be planned and it has to be, there needs to be a purpose. And how do we do that? So we have three main purpose or purposeful manner in where we could use translanguaging. The first one is median-oriented function, which is some teachers use their students L1 to teach some grammar concepts or vocabulary. It could also be a framework function, which is you use the students L1 to organize and to manage the classroom by giving instruction and setting tasks, for example. And the social function, which is used to build rapport and social relationship. Probably as a teacher, you have already used your students L1 in the classroom. And that's always like the elephant in the room that we don't want to say, like especially when we're being evaluated or when we're being observed. It's like we don't use Spanish in the classroom, but we do. Our students do. Even if we want to, if we tell them, or even if they talk to you in English, they probably talk among themselves in Spanish, and it's really hard to try to stop them from doing that. Okay. And okay, cool. I'll wrap these things up. Okay, so so these are the three let's say ways in which you could also use translanguaging in a very that word is so difficult, purposefully, in a purposeful manner. That's word is so difficult. Anyway, okay. So where do we go from here? Okay, now that we know that we can actually use our students L1 in the classroom, that it's okay to use their very rich linguistic resources in the classroom. The TESOL International Association, they have a standard for their teachers, for their teaching programs, and this is something that a draft from their goals that they have for their teachers. It says here, candidates should demonstrate knowledge of language processes, interlanguage, translanguaging, language progressions, and social and academic language. So it's like they are now including translanguaging in a standard for their teachers. Unfortunately, this was just a draft, and they ended up not using translanguaging and just interlanguage. But the good thing is that they're talking about this now. I mean, TESOL International Association is talking about translanguaging. And again, I'll say this very quickly: the Common European Framework, the CEFR, even they promote plurilingualism, pluriculturalism, and the development of a plurilingual competence as the desired goals of language teaching and learning. So even the CEFR, they are promoting plurilingualism in the classroom. Okay, so what is the goal? And with this, I close already. What's the goal now of the teaching and learning of English? Or what should be the goal? The goal of English teaching and learning in the post-multilingual era is no longer acquiring the native-like form of English and becoming another monolingual, but becoming a competent multilingual language user who is aware of and sensitive to the context and could perform fluid, dynamic, and complex language practices with creativity and criticality to achieve their expressive and communicative needs. So this should be the goal of teaching and learning English. And it's not just me saying this, okay? It's actually the literature's telling this to us, okay? And with that, I finished this presentation. I think it was just right on time. Is that correct, Elena and Taya?
Yes. We have some questions in Facebook. I don't know.
Okay. Go. Do we have time to answer those questions?
We have a couple.
Okay,
Cool.
cool.
Like 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, cool. So, what are these questions?
I'm going to. The first question says, how much resistance do you believe there will be to switching from monolingualism to applying translanguaging ideas, especially for educators who were formed in the monolingual approach?
That is a very good question, Ariel. It's very difficult. It's extremely difficult. I mean, even TESOL, TESOL International Association, one of the biggest association from teachers. I mean, it's not that they're resisting. I mean, they haven't shown a resistance to translanguaging, but they're ignoring it. It's like, hey, we have all these evidences that says that using students' linguistic repertoires in the classroom is actually something good, but they keep ignoring this. And why do I say that they keep ignoring this? Because they're not giving rooms or they're not giving a space to translanguaging, especially in their journal, for them to be there. Also, they're not giving courses on translanguaging. And I believe, and this is not just my personal opinion, but it's the opinion of people like Ofelia Garcia, who said translanguaging should be part of the teaching training programs. And so I think there is a lot of resistance, and we can talk like an hour about that because it has a lot to do with politics as well, because translanguaging is also about social justice, and there are many things at risk, in the sense that it's not only something, or it doesn't have to do with your identity or your ideology as a teacher, but there are also some external factors, political factors, and even monetary factors that kind of prevent translanguaging from blooming now. So yeah, it's gonna be very hard, but it's happening, and that's a good thing that we're talking about this, and it's changes are coming. So do we have another
Yes,
question,
we have another.
or?
What are the differences regarding this approach between Australia and Paraguay?
So the main differences, I mean, which are huge actually. In Australia, we have migrant students who are coming to Australian schools, and they speak many different languages. So imagine you're a teacher in Australia, and you have a class with 35 students, and you have 20 different languages there. It's difficult. It's really tough. And the approach that Australian schools are using is English only in the classroom. So they usually put these students in special programs where they first learn the language, and they are being integrated into the mainstream classroom. And they're being really behind their peers when it comes to learning the content. So what translanguaging is proposing is, hey, let's not have these special programs for students. Have them in the mainstream classroom and give the teachers the tools so that the teacher could use all of those linguistic resources of their students to learn not only the content but also the language. So the main difference that we have from Australia and Paraguay is that it's a little bit more complex, because they have to learn not only English, but they have to learn history. I mean, they have to learn math, chemistry, physics. It's more complex. And I think translanguaging, and that's also a matter of social justice there with the students, and the preservation of their languages. So it's different.
We have another question that says, can Llanito be considered translanguaging?
I don't follow that question.
I googled it because I don't know what Llanito is either. And it says it is a linguistic variety commonly used by the inhabitants of Gibraltar. It's a mixture between English and Spanish.
Well, I am not familiar with that term, so I couldn't answer that. But if it's a mixture of languages, usually from a language that is considered of high value and another, it could be like a sort of pidgin thing language. So I don't think that could be. Translanguage is something that we all do. If you're bilingual or multilingual, you do translanguage every day. It's because it's also practice. It's not only a theory. So it's translanguaging is not a language. It's not one thing only. It's a concept. It's a theory. It's a pedagogy. It's a practice, and many more things. Because translanguaging is jumping not from the educational field also to the political area. So it's a lot of things.
Well, that's it. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you, guys. So it's been great being here, and thank you for having me here. Thank you for giving me the space to talk about this wonderful topic.
Wonderful indeed. Thank you so much, Professor Ramirez, for sharing this presentation with our audience. Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you, Taide, for hosting this so wonderfully as well. And now we are going to give room to our next presentation. We would like to welcome Professor Maria Laura Justice, and she's going to share with us this topic. It is interpreting the job and interpreting in times of COVID. And this presentation is hosted by Fernando Boxia. So welcome to both of you.
Hello, thank you very much. Fernando, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Lovely
Hello,
to see you all again.
Yes, it is. So, should we start?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, okay. So the idea is that we're going to have a conversation about interpreting with Professor Justice. And well, I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Fernando Boxia. I'm a fourth-year student. I was a student of Professor Justice, I think 2 years. in different subjects, of course. Um, well, this is a little introduction I have of her. So Maria Laura Justice is a professional translator and interpreter. She is also a lecturer with a background in education, business, and management. She has studied and taught in universities in Europe and the US. She has worked as a translator and reviser at the Translation Center of the Organs of the European Union. She was also director of Sistema Uno and Richmond Publishing, where she did teacher training. Currently, she mostly translates and interprets for the government and international organizations. And as we said, most importantly, she is a lecturer at the ISL,
Absolutely.
where she has taught me about British social studies, translating, and of course, interpreting.
Yes, and a wonderful student you were too. But I feel that I should introduce you. Fernando is a professional journalist with huge potential for interpreting and translation, and one of the few students who is completely trilingual, which means that he can actually work in French, English, and Spanish very comfortably. And another job that I did in the past was teaching at his school, not when he was there, at the Lycée Français Marcel Pagnol. So, Fernando.
Yes. Yes. So the first question I wanted to ask you, Professor, is a very basic one. Is how would you define interpreting?
Well, interpreting is really rendering a spoken or signed language, a message, sorry, into another language. But the most important thing about it is that it's preserving the register, the meaning, and the intention of the speaker, which is not limited to language. So if you convey the exact meaning with the right intention, both your tone, the speed at which you speak, and so on, it's all equally important. So, yeah, interpreters basically convert the spoken word from one language into another, either face-to-face or remotely. So it's not limited to the cabin. And it's a beautiful and very enjoyable job, perfect for those who enjoy the adrenaline rush without leaving the cabin.
So what's the difference between interpreting and translating?
Well, basically, the means. In interpreting, you use language, spoken language, and in translating, you do exactly the same thing. You don't translate words. Words are not the unit of translation, segments are, but the real unit is meaning. So you render written messages between one language and another in translation. So one is written, the other one is spoken. That's really the difference. Yeah.
So, are there different kinds of interpreting?
Well, yes, but I would say that mainly there are two types of interpreting which are very different. One of them is conference interpreting, so simultaneous interpreting, which is basically at the same time as the speaker is speaking, the interpreter is interpreting. Normally, there's between 3 to 4 seconds difference between the moment when the speaker speaks and the interpreter interprets. The other type of interpreting is called consecutive or ad hoc. And within this discipline, there are several forms of interpreting. You have travel interpreting, escort interpreting, whisper interpreting or chuchotage, which is something that you're probably used to seeing on television when a president or a prime minister is at a meeting with another dignitary, and they have a person at the back who's whispering in their ear, and nobody knows what they're whispering, and they each have their own whisperer. That's chuchotage. Then you have telephone interpreting, which has become more tremendously popular these days, over the phone interpretation. There's court interpreting. Unfortunately for court interpreting, despite the pandemic, this is not the case. They expect interpreters to be there present. But in medical interpreting, there's been a huge change because, well, when you do community interpreting, which I believe is one of the most important forms of interpreting, because you're helping the community to get what they need, whether it is at the police station, at the airport, or at the hospital. But in the old days, if you needed to interpret at a hospital, they would call you at odd hours, and you would have to rush between your house and the hospital, cross the city to do interpreting. Nowadays, if you have a tablet or even a telephone, using very basic technologies such as WhatsApp, Hangouts, or Skype, you can interpret and serve the community by allowing a patient understand what the doctor is saying in the emergency room, for example. And then you have, of course, official visits where mostly you use chuchotage, but other times you just use consecutive interpreting and note taking. And but I think those are the most important forms of interpreting we have.
So, what kind of training does an interpreter need to have, or skills?
Well, in most places, both translation and interpreting are taught simultaneously, mostly as a postgraduate course, as a master's degree, or as a postgraduate diploma, depending on which country. But there are things that you need to have in advance before you even try to train as an interpreter. For example, you need to have at a minimum of a C2 level in the target language. But you need to be very passionate about language, about your own language, and the languages you're interpreting from. You need to be very acquainted with the different versions of the same language, because sometimes you think, oh, I'm fluent in Spanish, until you find a version of Spanish that you were not that fluent in, and where actual words have different meanings or expressions. You also have to go through very rigorous training. So you should study to become an interpreter. On a plus side, as a general rule, interpreters only work 4 hours a day. Well, contact hours. You also, and this is of paramount importance, you need to enjoy research, because if you become an interpreter, you will research long hours for the rest of your life, because for every job that we do, we spend, normally we start research 2 weeks in advance. If we can't, then at least 1 week in advance, because we need to create the glossaries. We need to become acquainted with the speaker when possible. Normally, we only interpret in fields that we do understand. There are many specialist fields. If you have not been trained or accredited to interpret in a certain field, you just wouldn't do it. You wouldn't accept. So mostly there are the fields where we work, we are familiar with, but even so, we still have to do plenty of research. Yeah. So it's fun. You always learn something new, even if you forget it afterwards. But there's always something interesting. It's fun. It's never boring.
Yeah, I would assume that preparation is a big part of it, or from what you're telling.
It is. Yeah. And also practicing. Sometimes when you don't have an interpreting job for an entire week or for 2 weeks, you still practice. Every time you watch the news, you're shadowing them, and sometimes you're interpreting them in your head. It becomes second nature. Yeah, it has its downside, but sometimes you want to correct them.
That's one type of exercise you made us do when you were teaching us interpreting.
Yes, hours and hours
listening
of
to
shadowing.
someone. Yeah, listening to someone and basically translating them in our head.
Yes.
Right?
Well, first intra-language translation or interpretation, where you have to listen to the speaker and shadow in their own language, in the same language, which seems like an easy job, but it's not. Once you've been doing it for 20 minutes, an hour, your brain starts playing tricks, and then it's not so easy. But yeah, and then eventually interpreting. Yes, and you did great, I remember.
So, Professor, how can someone become an interpreter? Is it something, is it a career that one studies, or is more of like something you kind of grow into?
Well, no, you need to train for any profession. You need to train as an interpreter. If you can't find an interpreting course exclusively for interpreting, you can always take a translation and interpreting course. In Paraguay, well, we offer an excellent program where we include interpreting in the translation program. But if this is not something that you can do, hopefully soon on Saturdays we will be offering interpreting as such at the ISL at the Faculty of Philosophy. Otherwise, another thing that you can do if you get a grant or if you can afford it, of course, is to do a postgraduate course in interpreting. The best universities in the world for this are well, Westminster in London, University of Strasbourg, where they do conference interpreting. Well, they have 3 masters, but the conference interpreting one is fantastic. Granada in Spain, and ESIT, Paris Sorbonne Nouvelle, Paris 3. That's where they do it. And Geneva, there's the Faculty of Interpretation. So there are places, as far as I know, because I don't know all of them, but as far as I know, these are excellent places where you can do a 1-year postgraduate course in interpreting. But in Paraguay, as I said, come to ISL.
Yes, come to the so, well, of course, you have a lot of experience in the field, not only in Europe or US, but you also worked here as an interpreter. Can you tell us about the Paraguayan market for this field?
Yes. Well, Paraguay is a bit of a tricky market. I do work from Paraguay, but and I work for the Paraguayan government, for instance, and I work for international organizations such as IC, the UN, the EU, and Global Canada, for instance. But locally, there's a certain resistance from the Paraguayan market to hire professional interpreters. Sometimes, I mean, it obviously depends on the company, but there is this misconception that, like Professor Terol was saying the other day, that anyone who speaks 2 or 3 languages is automatically an interpreter, which is not the case. And there have been cases in which they hire persons who do speak 2 languages but are not interpreters, and they get into the cabin and they freeze. Maybe they interpret 2 or 3 minutes and afterwards they freeze. And then they will come back to you and say, oh yeah, but the thing is that the difference in price was huge. And like, well, yes. And so that's a problem. That's it's not well seen as a profession, or perhaps the market doesn't quite understand that it is a separate profession from language teaching or even translation. I mean, it's true that most translators in Paraguay, most interpreters double up as translators as well. And also in Paraguay, something that is quite particular to Paraguay is that companies expect interpreters to work in both directions. And some people do. For example, I do. I have always worked in both directions. But for example, at the European Union in Luxembourg, I was not allowed to translate into Spanish because I was not hired as a Spanish translator. And in the case of interpreting, if it was necessary for consecutive interpreting, then yeah, maybe they will have someone working in both directions. But mostly in the cabin, you interpret into your mother tongue, into the language that you've been hired to interpret.
The language in which you are more proficient, right?
In which you pass the opposition.
Okay,
because,
yeah, that's
because
better.
it is the case sometimes of people who are native speakers of one language, but maybe all their academics were in the second language. And so academically, they're more proficient in the second language than in the mother tongue. I mean,
Okay, yeah,
they have, oh, well, many classmates of yours, for example, at school, who might
yeah.
have spoken
Well,
Spanish at home, but their academic language was French.
yeah, that happens. So I was wondering about the different technologies that interpreters have, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has
Oh,
changed the scene, let's say, for
yes,
interpreters.
yeah. I mean, the sector of interpreting has been heavily affected within the industry, but not necessarily negatively. I mean, there have been some negative effects, obviously, to some types of interpreting, but it's also been positive. Basically, 1/3 of the world's population is on lockdown at the moment, and so since businesses have closed and unnecessary human contact is discouraged by the governments, um, these platforms have allowed interpreters to work from the comfort of their own home. So on-site language services, well, they have suffered, obviously, because there's very little by way of on-site interpreting. But public sector interpreting, if it is on-site, also it has suffered. But on the other hand, virtual interpreting technology providers, well, they are becoming tremendously popular and rich. Remote interpreting services providers do have a lot of work because if you were going to interpret in a cabin in the old days, you had to go to the conference center or to the institution or whatever. But now we can interpret from here for clients who might be in other countries, in the States, in Canada, in Australia. Recently, I've had a very different type of interpreting because normally what I do is, well, as I said, institutional, government, finance, law, agreements, and so on. But I interpreted for, I think I told you already, Joe Sacco
Yes, the
for
writer.
Hermetic Media. Yes. At that particular moment, he was in the US. I was here. And the conference was organized by El Surtidor in Paraguay. And this was
Yes.
possible because we used, well, Zoom, which has an interpreting feature. But similarly, next week I'll be interpreting for someone who's in Canada, and it's not a problem. It's true that sometimes the internet plays up, just like it has for this symposium, but generally speaking, it's fairly good. I remember I lost maybe one sentence where the internet went wobbly, but I could quickly pick it up from the context and continued, and nobody noticed. I think only I did. So yeah,
So,
remote.
so it is possible to perform effectively
Oh, absolutely,
in a virtual.
absolutely. Yeah, and there's new technologies as well. I mean, not only Zoom. There's a virtual interpreting technology from Finland called UPRET, which is fantastic. And others. I mean, they're coming up with these features so interpreters can work remotely. It's also cheaper for the, I mean, more economic for the client, because normally when you work, if you have to travel, they have to cover your travel expenses, your hotel, your meals, and everything. And now they don't have to do that. And for us, it's also better because we don't need to be away from home. If it is cabin interpreting, I can assure you that working from here is a lot more comfortable than in the cabin. Sometimes the cabins are very stuffy and you end up very sweaty, which is not that nice.
Professor, I was also wondering, well, about basically the protocol, or let's say the ethical principles involved in interpreting, right? I was picturing the scenario in which, let's say, a government official or a businessman is being rude to your client as an interpreter,
Yes.
or vice versa.
Unfortunately, we have to interpret the exact meaning, the exact content, and the exact intention of the speaker, and we have to be impartial. So if they're being rude, you need to interpret rude, even if it's unpleasant. I mean, the basic ethics of interpreting, for consecutive interpreting, you need to keep it's all confidential, and you can't reveal the contents of the interpreting. Even if the interpreting becomes public, you still can't say anything about it. And obviously, you can't take advantage of the information that you hear, which in a business meeting could perhaps happen. You need to be accurate, which means that if they use dirty words, you can't soften them, and you're supposed to use the exact equivalent if you can find it, or go around until you manage to convey the same meaning. You need to be impartial, and sometimes being impartial can actually be difficult. And depending on who hires you, you might think, but this is the reason why you interpret everything that is said, not only what you think they want to hear. You have to be transparent, and you have to direct the communication, looking after cultural issues, respect boundaries. So your client is your client, and you have certain boundaries because you have to be impartial. You can't say at the end of the interview, "Now I'll take you out for a coffee. You're a bit upset, so come on, let's go and have a cup of coffee," to one of the parties. Basically maintain professional conduct. But when it comes to simultaneous interpreting, it's pretty much the same. It has to be confidential, and you have to respect the persons involved. You have to be impartial. You have to be faithful to the content. But there is one difference. No, actually, it's not a difference, because it applies to both. And it's if there is a conflict of interest. If there is a conflict of interest, you should say it in advance. And when you're doing community interpreting, for instance, this can be quite an issue. If you're interpreting for something that goes against your morals, for instance, and you feel uncomfortable in a certain situation, then you should say it, and they will ask somebody else. Now, if you don't agree with what's maybe about to happen in a medical center or in a court of justice, but you think that you can be impartial and that it will not affect your work, then it's okay, but you say it in advance. And also another thing, competence. You should never accept a job that you are not qualified to do. Even if you've had 20, 25 years of experience, you will find things that you don't know about, and that no 2-week preparation is going to sort. So being honest about that and saying, "Well, sorry, but I don't know anything about nuclear physics. So perhaps you should get someone who's more comfortable with that topic." I wouldn't do that, for example. Nuclear physics, I think, is beyond my scope. So yeah.
Okay, so this is the last question before my last question. Then we can go to some questions in the audience, I think.
Okay.
So it's also a very basic one. Would you give us some tips on how to get started in this field as Paraguayans living in Paraguay?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, make sure that you become completely proficient in both languages before you even think about becoming an interpreter. In translation, you have enough time to do research and to correct things again and again and again. which is why there are most translators work with several source languages and translate into maybe one, maybe two, but mostly one, because it's fine. You can look it up, you can compare, you can use computer aided translation, translation memory, even machine translation. But with interpreting, you don't have that luxury, and so you have to be very quick at going between languages. That becomes second nature after a while, and you don't have to think about it too much. But to get to that point, you need training. And in order to get training, if you're in Paraguay, what I suggest is that you pursue a degree in English studies, which is what we do, and that you take translation and interpreting extra seriously, and that you join Saturday classes, and eventually maybe, yeah, pursue a postgraduate course if possible, but continue studying always. Do the shadowing, read and listen to loads of versions of the languages you're going to be working with, and then practice. Start working with a senior interpreter. Sometimes even attending interpretations and seeing how it's done, staying by the cabin, preparing notes, helping senior translators to prepare glossaries. It does help a lot when you see how other people are doing it, and you can imitate for a while. But certainly train professionally at university. That's what I suggest.
Okay. So the first question we have is how much flexibility is needed to be a good interpreter?
Flexibility in what terms? Being
Well, that's the
available?
question.
Well,
That's always necessary for any job, I think.
yeah, being available can be a problem because most people, I'm talking about Paraguay, don't work exclusively as interpreters. I mean, there are some who do, but normally those who manage to work exclusively as interpreters have a partner who have a steady job. A lot of people ask about the pay, and to be fair, you do get paid a lot more by the hour, but the work is not as steady. You do get maybe a lot of work one week, and then the following week you might have just the one interpreting job, and so for that reason, being available all the time can be difficult. In my case, I do tutoring, and I do and I do lecturing, and most of the time it doesn't interfere with my lecturing job. This year I had to cancel not cancel, switch one class because I had a conference, but because of the time also it doesn't interfere so much. But it does interfere with my tutoring. So my students do know that every now and then I will have to switch them or move them to a Saturday. So that sort of flexibility is important. If I had been, I mean, I'm not a school teacher, but I wouldn't be able to be one either because of this. Working with tutorials is different because you can switch them around. So that sort of flexibility is important, yeah.
Well, for the example you made, you work almost as a fireman, being called to
yeah.
to put out a fire, basically.
Yeah, well, normally they let you know in advance, like a long time in advance. But yeah, every now and then, even if you know in advance, you still have to switch things around to make room for the conference or the visit. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're
done.
I think
Yeah,
so.
there's actually one more that just came in. If you could answer it very briefly. In order to be an interpreter, is it necessary to speak like a native speaker, or is it okay to have a slight accent? That would be our last and wrap-up question, a very important one, I believe.
Well,
so
it depends. I'm so sorry.
Oh, go ahead, please. Please.
Well, it all depends on where you're working. I mean, if you're working for an international organization as an in-houser or as an official, you're expected to be a native speaker of the language you interpret into, or to be completely bilingual in such a way that nobody would find it difficult to understand you. If it is for community interpreting or consecutive interpreting, and you have a slight accent, but you're completely understandable, then there's nothing wrong with that. And even for conference interpreting in places such as Paraguay, many interpreters work in both directions and do have a slight accent. Obviously, an accent is fine. It's actually charming, provided that everybody can understand you. I mean, the problem is when your accent is so strong that only you understand yourself, because then, of course, that's a problem in this particular profession. But yeah, nothing wrong with having a slight accent in any language. Yeah.
Wonderful. I believe that sometimes that can prevent some people from getting into the profession because they might be self-aware that they do have an accent, as we all do, and that might prevent from
we have an accent
jumping
in
into
all our languages, including our native ones.
Absolutely. That is absolutely true. And that's actually a very, very powerful food for thought. And with that, I'd like to thank you, Maria Laura Justice, our professor from our translation professor from the ISL, and also Fernando. Thank you so much for hosting this talk. And I would like to invite everybody, before we welcome Josefina Vitar, another professor at ISL, I'd like to invite everybody to leave their feedback. There is a link on the chat box, so please check the chat box. There is a link that will take you to a feedback form, and once you finish replying to all the questions, it's not very long, we promise, and you will be able to download your certificate. Okay, so please complete your feedback. Leave your comments. It's very, very important for us. So thank you, Maria Laura. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, Elena.
And
thank you,
so much.
Fernando. Okay.
Thank you. And now I would like to welcome Professor Josefina Vitar. She's going to talk about teaching online in English. And this presentation is hosted by Rosa Cristani and Veronica Aranda. So welcome.
Thank you, Elena. I'm not sure if I click here on present now, that's how I share my screen.
That is right. Present now, and you will see three options. One that says all your screen, a window, and a tab. If you are sharing a PowerPoint, I would suggest a window. If you are sharing something that is like a Google Slides, I would suggest a tab.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. Just give me 3 minutes. Just 1 second.
Okay, we have Josefina back. Hello, Professor. Your mic is muted, so there you go.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about teaching online, and it's obvious that I don't use Google Meet. So I'm not going to be talking about Google Meet.
Don't worry.
Anyway,
there are so many platforms that teachers can use. Google Meet is just one of them, and it's been playing some tricks on us for sure.
Miss, I can present the PowerPoint if you want to. I will do it. Don't worry.
Will be great. Thank you.
Yes, don't worry.
And you'll be clicking on the links too then, right?
Hmm?
Oh, cool.
Yes. Just give me 1 second and I will present. Don't worry. There.
All right.
Let me
Okay.
start. Yes.
Excellent. So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here, quote unquote, here on a Friday night. I don't think this would be possible pre-pandemic, right? Friday night symposium, full of great people. So anyway, my name is Josefina Bitar, and I started teaching at ISL this year. And well, I had to start teaching online as well. So that has been an interesting experience. And I will be joined, or I am joined by my students, Rosa Cristani and Veronica Aranda. I teach psycholinguistics and neurolinguistics, also known as Linguistics 4 at ISL. I'm actually a PhD student at an American university. So I've been teaching online for my university in the United States as well. And I started teaching online, I think in 2018, which was an interesting experience because I had never taken a class online before. And they offered me an online course and I had to teach it. And that was interesting. It was very scary at the beginning. And fortunately, I counted on the help of many people, including colleagues who told me, you're going to be fine. We're going to share all our material with you. And I think that kind of collegiality is great. And so if I can help anyone with the things that I'm going to be talking about, that, like if you think, oh, I think that's a good idea, how can I do it? Then you send me an email and I will happily help you and talk to you more in detail about it. So what Rosa and Veronica are going to do is they're going to talk from the student's perspective, and also Veronica has experience teaching children online, which it blows my mind how people can do it. And so anyway, this talk, or this workshop / panel, I'm going to follow 3 main points. Well, the first point is backward design. Basically, I'm going to talk about goals. The second is active learning, collaboration, and interaction in an online class. And the third point will be assessment. Okay, so before we start, I just want to make this clear. I think with the pandemic, we've all started talking more about online learning and teaching. And I think most people, because the pandemic happened overnight. People had to go from teaching in person to teaching online. So many institutions decided to have synchronous online teaching, which is basically people meet at a certain time, certain day, and instead of having a lecture in person or having the class in person, they have it through Zoom or Meet or one of these platforms. Now, I started teaching online before the pandemic, and my training in online teaching is basically from an asynchronous point of view, and I've always taught online this way. I've always taught online with an asynchronous method, way, or approach. So I'm going to be talking more about the asynchronous perspective because that has been my experience. I know that for a lot of people this isn't an option. Your institution tells you, okay, you have to do it this way, and in fact, next semester I have to teach online synchronically for the first time. So I also welcome any tips that you might have. And of course, Veronica will talk to us about her experience from a synchronous perspective as well.
Yes, so I teach at a bilingual school and we have synchronous classes almost every single day, and it's 2 hours. But I teach second grade, so they are little kids. So it's very different than teaching teenagers or even university students. So yes, and I'm going to be talking about from a Paraguayan perspective in a bilingual school with 7-year-olds basically.
Excellent. So backward design. Basically, backward design means that we start from the end, right? So what is our goal when we teach, or what do we want our students to learn? And this, of course, is second nature to most teachers. We talk about objectives and goals all the time. So can you click? So I'm going to be talking about goals, and I'm going to be talking about how we can discuss goals with our students as well, which I think is something that I've learned to do. I've been teaching for quite a while, but I never discuss objectives with students, and now I'm sort of changing the ways I do things. And I will explain why. Okay, so, well, we all usually start from, student learning outcomes, and usually these are given to us by our institutions. Like, this is where we want students to be. This is what the skills that we want your students to have, and you can use the methods that you want. You can use the assessments that you feel comfortable using and things like that. So sometimes you do not have a lot of freedom with objectives. So the other thing, and this is something that's been my case at the university and in the US, they usually tell me, you're going to teach this class, and that these are the student learning outcomes. And well, the same at UNAM. This is the syllabus. This is the programa de estudio, right? And we want your students to achieve these goals, to get these skills. But what I do when I have those big goals, I break them down into mini goals, and I use module objectives, and my modules are usually weekly. So I'm going to show you an example of how I break down those big goals that they're usually, students have to achieve those goals during the entire semester, the entire year, but every week has its own goal as well. So something that has sort of changed my mind about the way I teach is, so I was taking this teaching training, and so we started this teaching training, and they asked us, this question that's highlighted in green here. What would you like your students to remember from your course 5 years from now? And that changed the way I look at my own teaching, that made me assess the content of my courses, my assessment methods, and things like that. So I think that's good practice to have, is always remember, okay, why you're doing the things that you're doing, like why you are choosing that content, why you're choosing that textbook, why you're lecturing, why you're giving an exam, why you're and sort of not only think of the short term, but also, will this benefit my students in some way? Because I teach, I should have said this, I guess, but my academic background is in linguistics, and I teach linguistics courses, and I know that most of my students won't be linguists. So I have to think, okay, do I really want them to know, I don't know, what a minimal pair is? Or is there something else that they can gain from this course that's not just memorizing what a minimal pair is? Thank you.
So for us at school, we have to follow ministry guidelines basically. And because bilingual schools usually take into consideration whatever the program they are following. For example, we follow the American program too. So we have to make like a mixture of both. If you have a blended type of education, so you have to make the ministry happy, but also you have to follow the guidelines. So it's a bit difficult, especially now that everything is online. So basically you have to translate everything that you were supposed to have in the year to online. So yes, it's a bit difficult because your objectives actually change, because as Ms. Vitar said, you need to be very specific about what you want your students to remember. So you start to pick the things that you think are the most important for your students. In my case, my kids.
All right, so well, of course, we all have a syllabus, and okay, as a student, I haven't always read the syllabus, to be honest. And it's something that it's the first day of class, you have to like talk about the syllabus, and it can be very boring. So there is a movement, I think, to make syllabi more accessible and more engaging. So can you click on the link, please, Veronica? This is something I actually, yes.
I don't think you will. Let's see if it works.
Okay.
Let me see. I have to change the type of presentation.
Okay. So there is a movement to make syllabi more interactive, more engaging, more. So this is something that I did actually. I ended up not using this. I was planning on using this Padlet I created. But then what happened is that my department at the university decided, oh, now we're going to change the student learning outcomes. And I was like, I'm not changing that beautiful Padlet. So I ended up not using one. But every semester I try to think of ways of making the syllabus a little bit more engaging. And well, so this with this Padlet, you can click on different parts and yeah, I don't know why that map is not working, but anyway. And so that students are aware of what to expect from the course, right? Because again, I don't think well, at least I didn't have that habit of talking about goals with my students, which I think was not a good practice probably. So now, whenever, so this is something that has come up in the UNA courses. Well, like some students, because sometimes the material can be a little bit too much. So, you know, I always tell them, well, remember what the goal is. Like, this is what you, this is the skill that you want to get. This is what's important. This information that the author of the textbook is giving you is not important, because this is what you need to achieve the goal of the course, the module, and things like that.
I will share the other two.
Okay. And so the other one is a course map, which is was a new concept for me. Well, I learned about course maps this year, and is basically more specific. So you talk about what you're going to do each week. So again, this is a project that's sort of halfway there, because I only usually my courses are 16-week long, and I only had the first 4 weeks. So I talk about the course objectives, or I talk about the module objectives, of course, of each module, and then I connect them to the course objectives. And again, I try to do it in a way that's interactive, that's engaging, and so then students know what will happen each week, and what to expect each week, and how that connects to the big goals of the class. So this is something that I started using since I started teaching online, is this module overview, which is at the beginning of each module, the beginning of each week. I say, okay, this is what we're going to do. These are the topics that we're going to talk about. These are the learning objectives. This is the material that you're going to read or you're going to watch. And these are the activities. So the first one was an example from the university in the US. The university basically gave me this template. But here at UNA, I had more freedom, so I decided to go with more colors. And so then every week students can learn before they start the model, or right at the beginning of the module, they know what's going to happen. And I think that from what I've heard, I think this is something that has helped students. So I've received good feedback that this is actually something that they use. I think that Rosa wanted to talk about this.
Yes, but I'll talk about from the student perspective, since I don't teach. For me, for example, these types of visual aids are very useful. They help me out how to navigate the chapter and the important things I need to know. Because sometimes readings, they tend to be long, and there are other subjects as well. So with these, I use it as a map. So these are the important things I need to know, and then I start crafting my summary based on that. And usually our prompts are based on the knowledges and on the objectives that are shown in those little colorful squares.
Well, something I wanted to say about this too is that it looks like it's a lot of work, and it is the beginning. And this is something that my coworkers who had taught online for longer than I had told me it's a lot of work at the beginning. But then if you do a lot of work at the beginning, then throughout the semester, throughout the year, it's less work. So I think that being very clear about objectives, about expectations, about the key concepts about the readings, from the very beginning and from the beginning of each week, because if you tell your class, this is what's going to happen a month from now, for me, that would be a long time. So every week, this is what is going to happen. This is what it's expected from you. Is also good for you as a teacher, because that you don't receive tons of emails. I don't know what I have to do, or I don't know what I'm supposed to read, or when do we have to turn in this or that, and things like that. I'm not saying that never happens, but I think being clear from the very beginning minimizes those extra communications, let's say.
This, excuse me, Ms. Vitar, this also helps the student to be more independent. The student already knows what the student needs to do and what it is expected for the student. This is very difficult to bargain. When you have this uploaded in the platform, you cannot tell to the professor, no, I don't want to do this module. I mean, you can, but you're not going to have the points. So there are things that you cannot bargain. For example, when you know what you're expected to do and everything is pretty much clear, it follows it's like a map, it guides you.
I don't know if you want to add something, Veronica.
Yes, like for us, because I have kids, so it's very difficult to be, how can I say this? And so this year you're going to learn this. It doesn't work for me, at least. So maybe for us it's better to tell the parents, like, have not really show them our plan of the year, because that's not it as well. Maybe like some super small summary of the things that we're going to do this year. We have to do that at the beginning of online classes back in April when we have the platform. So we like put into perspective the things that we wanted to accomplish, because of course this way you cannot complete your general plan because of the circumstances that we're going through. So yes, for us was also very important. We have a similar model to the one that Ms. Vitar showed us of her university, but of course in Spanish, right? But yes, and of the objectives that we have in English this year. Good. So I continue?
Yes, thank you, Veronica.
No problem.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about active learning, and I think it overlaps with collaboration and interaction very well. So I'll talk a little bit about what I do, or what my online courses look like, or what students have to do. Okay, so active learning, I think it's pretty much going beyond lectures. So I think this is something this is something that teachers of children know very well. You can't go to a class and talk for 40 minutes and expect everyone to pay attention. And this is something that language teachers know very well, that if you go to a language course, like let's say you're teaching English, and you talk for 40 minutes, your students are not going to learn English. And that's something that, of course, language teachers know very well. Teachers of children know very well. So unfortunately, I think this habit of lecturing, which, by the way, I think lectures can be very helpful for students learning. But I think for us college teachers or college instructors, sometimes we tend to lecture. And that's how I started teaching in college. So I would go to the classroom and talk for 50 minutes. And then I had to start thinking, like, why do I do this? Why do I lecture? Students have their reading. So everything that I say to them, they can read it from the textbook. So if I tell them everything that is covered by the textbook, then, well, first of all, they won't read the textbook. And then what is my role then? So I decided to use other activities also, so that students had to do something with the information. They had to be active, and that doing something with the information usually involves, you know, working with a partner, working with their classmates. And I think this is something that online learning and teaching is something that is, I'm not going to say it's easy to do, but it's doable as well.
So for me and for all my coworkers that work with children, and a typical class for us involves like at least 15 activities at in the span of 2 hours. So you have the form, you have the video, you have the song, and you have to do all of that with them. You have the scavenger hunt, and you have the scavenger hunt in 2 specific parts of the house. So you have to find different objects only in your living room. If you don't have that, well, you have to invent things like that. So for us, it was really just like try to keep them engaged and try to show them whatever they might find interesting. For example, on the last 2 months of classes, we have animal units in the science book. So we watch a lot of videos of metamorphosis and stuff. So, and they love that. And for me, it was okay because it was fun. And the thing is, you learn a lot along the way with them. And for me, that was the most the best part, because you're also learning a lot with them. And yes, and you actually see their progress. I think that's the best part. Even in online teaching, it's very visible.
Okay, so something that I had to learn when I started teaching online is to record my lectures. Because, as I said, I don't teach from a synchronous approach. I basically record my lectures and I post them on the platform. So one of the suggestions that the Department of Digital Learning gave me was, your lectures have to be short. So I think a lot of us, when we start teaching online, we think, okay, we teach for 15 minutes. So then we have to record a 15-minute lecture. And what research has found is that's not very useful for students. So what we are encouraged to do is record. Maybe if we think that we have enough material or to talk about for 50 minutes, we divide those in mini lectures that are no longer than 6 minutes. If you're one of my students here, I know what you're thinking. Your lectures are longer than 6 minutes. Yes, it's hard to talk about something for less than 6 minutes. So I try. I do my best. I usually get to 9 minutes, and that's those are considered fine by me. But and again, this is based on research that has shown that people do not look at a video, do not watch a video, a lecture for more than 6 minutes. Usually by the 7th minute, they close the window or they stop watching. Now, something that if you have videos of your teacher and you have recorded lectures and they are longer than 6 minutes or longer than 10 or 15 minutes, which is something that I have done. I have recorded lectures of 15, 20 minutes. What I usually do is I create like a table of contents. So like from second 1 to minute, I don't know, 10, I talk about this topic. From minute 10 to minute 15 this topic. So then students can sort of, maybe they don't want to talk, maybe they don't want to, they're not interested in, I don't know, topic A, they are interested in topic B, so then they can find that topic in your table of contents. Wait, I didn't talk about the other two. The other two are important. Okay, discussion forums. So someone said to me once, like, discussion forums for online teaching is like lecture for in-person teaching. Like, you have to do it. You don't know why you do it, but you have to do it. Like, if you teach in person, you have to lecture. If you teach online, you have to use discussion forums. And you don't think too much about why you do it. So the reason why I have my students discuss in forums is because that helps them, well, that forces them to read the material, or at least engage with the material in some kind of way. And also to synthesize information, or synthesize information about research, which is essential for the academic endeavor, the academic where you have to be able to read something and synthesize it and give your opinion about it and connect it to your experience in the classroom or your experience in life in general. And something I learned along the way with discussion forums is that at the beginning I had discussion forums of like about 30 people. And it was very hard for me to follow those discussions as an instructor, and grading them was a pain. So what the people at the Digital Learning Center told me was, well, break them into groups. And I think, and that's something that I think a lot of people do through Zoom as well. They have breakout rooms. So it's the same with discussion forums. It's, if you have a large class, what you can do is, if your platform allows it, is you can put them into groups, and then the discussion becomes a lot more engaging, because you have, instead of having 30 students discussing a topic, you have 6 students or 7 students. And that has worked pretty well for me, working with groups, small groups. And blogs are very similar to discussion forums, except that I usually use blogs at the beginning of the module when the topic is brand new. So sort of before they start reading about the chapter or watching the material, they talk about basically just their experience before they engage with the material. So I don't know if you want to say something, Veronica, Rosa?
Miss, we have 5 minutes left of the presentation, and there is a question for you.
Yes.
What do you think is the difference between teaching asynchronically and teaching in person, especially regarding how you communicate the syllabus and the activities?
Great. I will answer that question in like a couple slides.
Excuse me, Professor. Also, Mr. Christoffel wants to ask something. So please, we need to give them space to ask their questions. There are 2 people that are asking questions.
Excellent. So, okay, so assessment. Then this is something that usually comes up. You can just go to the next slide. It's like, whenever you tell people you teach online, they're like, oh, seguro que tus alumnos se copian todo luego. Like, well, I mean, so plagiarism it usually comes up in, when we talk about teaching online. And well, I'll be brief, but basically I don't give students exams that I think they will be able to cheat in. So usually when you go for the higher level thinking skills, like creating, evaluating, and things like that, it's very hard to cheat. Maybe if you can ask your classmate to take the exam for you, but like, I mean, if I was my own student, like there's not enough money that you could pay me to take someone else's exam. no way. Anyway, so I'll just skip that. And yeah, I usually give students low stakes quizzes or low stakes X because I think that it's important for students to have an assessment that doesn't is not going to have a huge impact on the grade. So like I usually give student quizzes, weekly quizzes, and each quiz is like 0.5% of the grade. But that helps me sort of see what are the things that we still have to work on. And it also helps the student know where they're at without and knowing what they need to do to reach the goals of the course. All right, somebody asked about asynchronous, synchronous. So this is something that I had to learn as well. Presence is key, especially when you're teaching asynchronically. And there are many ways of doing this. I send emails every week. Hello, this is the module is available. This is what you have to do. Course messages, Moodle has course messages. The other platform I work with doesn't. So this is something I like about Moodle, is that you can chat with your students. Video conference, of course, is always available. Like that, basically that your class is from an asynchronous perspective doesn't mean that you can never talk to your students one-on-one and be connected with these students at the same time. So I think there are many strategies in which you can demonstrate that you're there. And also giving feedback is very important because I think that, sometimes, I mean, this is something I experienced as a student, right? Like you would send your homework, your assignment, and then you never get feedback, you never get a comment. And I think this is something that I try to do. Sometimes a strategy that I really like is I assign, let's say, okay, every week you have to submit questions. And I tell my students, but I'm only going to grade 5 of the 16 weeks, but you don't know which ones I'm going to grade. That's a strategy that I think compromises sort of your, all the grading that you have to do with your students receiving feedback and knowing that you're going to read their work.
Professor.
Yes.
Professor, I have a question that was sent to me. So how to be fair regarding assessment? Assessing numbers like 5 or 2, for example, in assessments regarding language matters. How can you be fair with that? How do you consider?
Regarding language, okay, what do you mean? Like language skills?
Yes. For example, you said that you have a very like different ways on assessing, and how are you fair with the way you assess, or what do you consider fairness?
So fairness, has to do with it's the same for all. So if you give someone an extension, you give everyone an extension. So you have to give everyone the same opportunities. And of course, if your student for some reason needs accommodations, then those are welcomed as well. I think that's one way of being fair. Another way of being fair, or making sure that you're fair, is you are clear from the very beginning what your expectations are. That's another way of being fair. And the other, I think, important component of fairness in grading is to give your students different opportunities to show that they have acquired the skills. So because some, like, let's say, understand that there are different learning styles. So give some students are strong in presentation. Some students are strong writers. Some students are strong with projects. So I think that's a way in which we can maximize fairness. Of course, fairness is an ideal. You're not going to be like super fair all of the time. But I think another something that we can do as instructors is also let students make students comfortable enough that they can tell you if they think you graded them unfairly, and engage in that conversation.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, that's my email.
So yes, thank you so much for your presentation, Professor, and for like clarification as well.
Thank you for joining me, Veronica and Rosa.
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Josefina. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Rosa, for hosting this event, for presenting and sharing your experience in online teaching. We are about to finish, so stay tuned. Don't leave us because we have just one more presentation, which is coming up next. Don't forget to click on the link that we sent you in the chat box on Facebook. Leave your feedback so you can receive your certificates. Okay. And now, without further ado, we are going to look at this topic, which is very interesting, presented by Carolina Ortiz. And the topic is improving speaking with interactive tasks. So I am going to start sharing. So this is going to be our very last presentation of the night.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carolina Ortiz, and today I would like to present improving speaking skills through interactive activities. I would like to thank Instituto Superior de Lenguas for organizing the 4th English Language Symposium in this year, 2020. So I would like to give a little bit of background before I start the presentation. I am the academic director as well for Stella Finetti Ortiz English, and we represent Trinity College London exams. So these exams offer different like a variety of evaluations, and one of them would be related to graded examinations in spoken English, which is mainly an oral exam that is distributed in different levels. We also have the integrated skills in English, which by its name talks about the integration of skills. So this evaluation also is invited for learners who can present writing tasks, essays, and other tasks that are related to all language skills. And the other evaluations that Trinity presents are Trinity Stars for young learners. This would be including performing arts. We also have ESOL Skills for Life and Secure English Language Tests. But at Style, we're the center of examinations of Trinity in Paraguay. I would like to give you a little bit of information about what levels we are talking about when we talk about evaluations of the oral exam. And then I'm going to show you this interactive task that is truly going to help you improve speaking skills with your students. So if we start from the beginning level, for basics level 1 and on, when we talk about GC exams, we start at GC1 and we finish in GC12, which is one of the highest. If we take a look at the Common European Framework, we see that it goes and it starts from A1 to A2 levels and it grows on. Now, if we transpass this to Trinity ISE, Integrated Skills for Examination, we are going to concentrate on levels ISE 0, ISE 1, ISE 2, 3, and 4. Today, we're going to be concentrating on a B1, B2 level, meaning that we would be working with students that are at a higher elementary intermediate stage of their proficiency. Yeah. If we compare these exams to others from Cambridge, we can see that if we concentrate for the ISC2 level, that is my level of proficiency that I would like to talk about today, we're aiming at B2 levels according to the Common European Framework. We're aiming to Cambridge exams such as the first examination, and we have this average for TOEFL and IELTS. When we talk about speaking activities, we need to incorporate this in our classes, right? So this examination evaluates the confidence in which the student can maintain a conversation, is able to present or to talk about a specific topic. So in GC exams, what they want is students to prepare a mini topic of their choice, but they should follow certain parameters of the grammar point. In ISC levels, the same thing. They have to present a listening task. They can listen to a specific audio and they will be asked about the audio. They also have to present a topic. And there is one of the tasks that is called interactive task or collaborative tasks, depending on the level of the exam. So we're going to concentrate on that. Like topic phase. What do we mean by topic phase? I want you to think about what are the moments that I incorporate or that I create scenarios in my class so that my students can improve their speaking. One of them would be to open a space where they present a topic, when they choose a topic. So what do they do with this? They have the candidates have the opportunity to show what they can do in English with this topic phase interaction. They use the communicative skills, language functions, and language items of the grade. They use the link sentences together to talk about subjects at some length, and they lead a discussion on a topic. So those are key aspects of interactive tasks, and also aspects when we want students to present a topic. We don't want students to present a topic by memory. We don't want them to learn a script by heart. What we want in this topic phase is we want them to think about a topic that is of their interest. We want them to create opportunities so that they can present this to an examiner that is evaluating their level. And this is a one-to-one exam. Again, this is not a group exam, it's a one-to-one interview exam. During the conversational phase, candidates can exchange information and ideas and opinion with the examiner. They take more responsibility for maintaining and sustaining a conversation, and they display their ability to use communicative skills, language functions, and language items. So these are the main objectives of this exam. Examiners are constantly checking for these objectives, like they want to see how much the candidate is able to communicate, to keep a conversation going, to initiate and to end a conversation. If we concentrate on GC level, like on GC 7, which is going to be at the intermediate level, take a look at all the grammar aspects that we are going to consider, like second conditional, for example, passive voice, used to, relative clauses. We want to make a rubric so that we know what language we are expecting at this stage. So at a given time of the exam, within those 5 to 7 minutes of a conversation phase, the examiner is after paying attention to the student's production of the language, right? The student has to use this type of expressions. Like, for example, if they talk about national and local products, like if you start in an export business, what local products would you sell? These are type of questions that they ask to the candidates so that they can hear if the candidate is able to produce in the grammar expectations. Take a look at the topics for education, for early memories, village and city life, and cost and pollution. I'm going to give you 1 minute of silence so that you can see the task. So take a look at the areas of recycling, which is going to be this last row. If you were the president, how would you protect the environment? Yeah. So what's measures uh, uh, take, and what are the measures taken to reduce pollution and recycle in your city? These are type of questions that students could be asked during this conversational phase. Then we jump into the collaborative task or the interactive task. And this is my main point of the presentation for tonight. Yeah. So we have through the interactive task, students can demonstrate their independence as users of English. They can understand and use the language functions of the grade. They can take control over and maintain the interaction and participate in an authentic exchange of information. So they didn't prepare, they didn't they are there just waiting for a prompt, waiting for a scenario. So what happens here? um, we start interaction by asking more information. You need to ask, if you're a candidate, you need to ask the examiner questions and make comments. If you're a candidate, you invite the examiner to make comments and you take responsibility for maintaining interaction. These are the basic skills of this phase of the exam. Like, this is a moment where the student is invited to fulfill all these objectives. He's supposed to be taking responsibility and maintaining. So I have a question for you. How many times do you organize activities so that you give the ball to students so students can maintain the conversation, so students can start interaction among each other, not depending on you, always you asking the question and having them answer? How many times have you created scenarios? Well, especially this year that we have been working with online classes due to the pandemic. I know it was harder, but how many times did we organize breakout rooms? How many times did we ask one student to ask another and we would witness it? Typical reaction is, no, my students are shy. No, my students lack. Well, the point is, are we giving them enough expressions that they can use and that they can refer to when answering the questions? The big problem stays there because we forget that we need to visualize and they need to have an example of expressions that they need to have when interacting with others. So, for example, if I have to give advice, what expressions would I use? You should, you ought to, if I were you. Yeah. Making suggestions. Why don't you? Have you thought about? When describing past habits, I used to, we would. Expressing possibility. That might help. I'm not sure about. Expressing agreement and disagreement. I see what you mean. I'm not sure I agree. Highlighting advantages. On the one hand, such and such and such. However, on the other hand. But this doesn't stay only in one flat. I would suggest you to print this or have students have these expressions on one side. So when they practice this stage of interaction or interactive phase with you or the partners, they can refer to these expressions. Yeah, it's easy to say, oh, we cover that in the unit. No, 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 no. You have that on the site. You have a printed site, a printed page that you can refer to. So these are check marks, like this is the assessment for the examiner. And so the examiner would be checking if the student, when he's reaching to the interactive task, he's able to ask for further information. Like, is he just asking simple questions for the prompt that I'm giving, or is he expanding? Is he asking more questions about it? Is he giving advice? Is he describing past habits? Is he asking about it? Does he have the ball on his side? Is he demonstrating that he can be responsible for maintaining a conversation? So this is one example of an interactive phase demonstration prompt that you could do in your class. Yeah, depending on if you're taking the exam or not, you can still do this in class. It's very useful, and that's why I thought I should share this with you tonight. This is an example that is found in their website of Trinity, and of course, at the Institute, we celebrate this type of activities too. Look at this. You are going to pretend to be the examiner, you as the teacher, yeah? You have to read out the instructions and the prompt. You will need to invent a story to help keep the conversation going. So you can use the hints to help you think of ways to say. So you open up a prompt. And I will show the prompts later. You give a prompt, but you are responsible to keep the conversation. You to answer questions that your student is asking, and you need to create a scenario in your mind. Yeah. So for the next part, I'll tell you something. Then you have to ask me questions to find out more information. You need to keep the conversation going. After about 4 minutes, I will end the conversation. This is going to be the instruction that the examiner gives during the exam. This lasts 4 minutes. This phase lasts 4 minutes. But during those 4 minutes, he will be evaluated upon these standards, as I was sharing, right? And he will be expected to use these expressions. So he knows what to expect. He knows where he's going, right? Okay. What would be the prompt? My local college has a great range of courses, and I would really like to study something, but I'm not sure which course to take. So this is you as a teacher giving a prompt to the student. And the student looks at you and he goes, So he can not necessarily give you a suggestion right away. He can ask more questions so that he can get more information about this situation. And then at the end, he can give some suggestions. But this is not about, I am sick, I don't know what to do. Oh, you should go to the hospital. We're not talking about that. We're talking about interacting. We're talking about going deeper and inferring through answers that you give so that he can ask you more things and he can give comments. Again, I will rewind. I will look at this. We would be expecting him or her to use this type of expressions when describing past habits, when asking for certainty, when giving advice. Okay, so for example, if you are the teacher, you need to keep in mind these hints. You haven't studied college for some years and you feel nervous. This is information that you can have on your side. You're not sure if you would choose something physical or academic, but when you were at school, you used to be at art. You used to be good at art. Your family thinks it's a good idea. Advantages, you would be able to do something independently. You would be able to meet new friends. And disadvantages, you would have to go alone, but with no other friends. So this is information that you can keep for the story, because he's going to ask you questions and you need to have these hints to keep it going. Or, of course, you can create a scenario on your own, but it's important for you to maintain a conversation so that you give confidence to your student that you will always try to have some information on the other side. Another example of an interactive phase would be you are going to pretend to be the examiner and you have to read this prompt. For the next part, this is the instruction again that talks about 4 minutes, and the prompt goes, I want to explore this area at the weekend, but I don't know where to go exactly and which is the best way to travel. So you as a teacher, you give this prompt and the student is going to start asking questions. But again, you need to have at least 2 to 3 hints in mind so that you will be able to answer questions that he asks. So this conversation is real. This conversation has a fundamental objective, like he knows where he's going. Yeah. These are several prompts that they provide at the website, and I'm going to give you a minute. Maybe you want to uh, go over some of them. Maybe you want to take notes of some of the expressions that you find interesting. Again, you don't necessarily need to be taking this exam, but you can create opportunities for students to interact among each other and learn to ask questions, to go deeper, and to learn more information about a situation. Okay, I'm sure that you're choosing maybe one that is calling your attention. For example, the one that calls my attention is number 5. It's my nephew's 7th birthday next week, and he has asked for a mobile phone. I'm not sure if this is a good idea. So then you can start having a conversation about what are these students' beliefs and what is his impression and what are some of the suggestions that of what are the other things that I could buy my nephew. But he has to ask me about what other interest my nephew has, right? So we're going to interact with this. This is a beautiful, beautiful way to create interaction and to evaluate speaking skills. I would like to thank the Instituto Superior de Lenguas for this opportunity, and I really encourage you to continue promoting interaction in your class. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina Ortiz, for sharing all these tips, all these information with our audience. Thank you so much. We have you there, and we really enjoyed it. And I would like to tell everybody that this video is also going to be on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to go over it again, please do, because it's really, really precious to help our students develop their speaking skills in a very communicative and interactive way.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Carol. And with this last and awesome presentation, we are coming to an end. I would like to give leave the word to Valentina, please. We are eager to hear what your opinion is on this, on today's presentations, on yesterday's presentations. I'm very, very excited, and I'm very, very happy and energized as well.
Well, before anything, I would like to thank all of you. I thank Elena, Carolina, Maria Laura, Chris, especially more than anybody, Christian, who's here, and he's going to be able to, his connection is holding. So I was telling him that next time he needs to have a better connection, because we are probably missing all his fans, because I don't know if you know, Mr. Cristofo has like a fan base and who follows him everywhere. And next year, I'm sure he will have a better internet connection, and he will also be presenting so that his fan base can also be attracted. I would also like to thank all of the presenters, all of our professors who presented, Josefina, Maida, Ivan, I forget, yesterday, Cynthia, Alicia, I don't know if I'm forgetting anybody. Christian, help me out here. And especially our students who work really hard in producing really good videos for you to go and visit on the YouTube channel. We will be sharing the videos also on our Facebook page, and these recording from our live symposium will stay on Facebook. So we want to ask everyone to please share the videos on YouTube, share this live transmission once it's recorded on Facebook, so that everybody can take advantage of the wonderful presentations that we had and the wonderful videos that we have on YouTube. And I know this has been a difficult year for everyone. Moving from in-person to virtual learning hasn't been easy for many people, and navigating the synchronous and asynchronous waters hasn't also been easy, so especially for our students. So I want to also send a word of encouragement to all of our students to stay strong. We only have about a month left until the end of the year. And then after that, there's only just exams, and then you will have 2020 behind you. And next year, regardless of how we meet next year, we would like to see all of you back with us. So please, everyone who follows us on our Facebook and our Instagram, we deeply thank you as well. We hope that this event has been to your satisfaction, and that you come back to watch our videos and watch our tips and watch the live transmission, and especially those who would like to apply to the ISL. Carolina's presentation I was putting on the message board is special for those who are preparing for the oral examination. So you need to study hard. Our entrance exam is quite competitive, so please make sure you prepare yourselves. It's a little bit challenging in this situation. We will have our pre-cursillo exams in December. We have one round in December and then another round in February, and our cursillo goes from February till March, and we will be having our entrance exam at the end of March as usual. So thank you again, and I just give the floor to Christian for a little bit because he has been the magician who put all of this together, and I want to give the recognition that he deserves. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me properly, but I really want to thank my first year students. Yay, you did it! With no experience at all, they put together wonderful videos that you need to watch on YouTube. So please do. Yes. Also, second year students, third year students, fourth year students that they already know about the symposium, but this time it's a live symposium, so it's different again. Thank you very much for their effort and their work. And especially my dear colleagues, my teachers and assistants, they were super. They did everything for the symposium, and we can see it. We can see on the results. So thank you very much.
All right, so I'd like to remind everybody to please leave your feedback on the link that's posted. And with this, we are wrapping up. Is that right, Valentina and Christian?
Yes, it is. We would like to give certificates to everyone, but in order to get that, you need to assess the symposium. You need to evaluate it. So the form is ready on the comments on Facebook. So just go there and do your evaluation. Thank you very much. Goodbye.